Hello, everybody. Joe the Lawyer here with a special request. Please like and subscribe because I have a contest going with Eric Tankar. All right. Whoever gets the 5,000 subs first, the guy has to buy the other guy a beautiful steak dinner with all the fixings and, of course, some high-end drinks, and also donate $100 to the other person's favorite charity. So I want to beat his ass. It's a friendly competition. So please click the like, subscribe button, comment, share it around, and help grow the channel. Totally appreciate it, guys. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I'm Joe the Lawyer. I want to thank you for checking out this video. Many of you got into D&D for the first time, probably via Matt Mercer's Critical Role series, or maybe you saw it on Stranger Things or The Big Bang Theory back in the day. Chances are you probably started with 5e, which is the latest version of D&D, although there's an edition change coming up. 5e is a good game. It's fine. And you probably watched YouTube videos maybe from Matt Colville or the Dungeon Dudes or Professor Dungeon Master and tried to learn more about how to play the game you love. But now you're, like I said, you're going through an edition change. You might be looking to try something new. You might have heard of the OSR and wonder what the hell is that? It's the old school Renaissance. And it's like, well, what is it? How do you get into it? What's that all about? That's why I made this video, to help you out. All right. First thing you're noticing probably right now is that it's a long ass video. I'm reading this. I wrote this whole little introduction before I'm even recording it here. I'm estimating that it's going to be like 3 hours, maybe more. And I know you're like, oh shit, man, how am I going to listen to or watch a 3-hour video or 4-hour video? You don't have to watch it. Just listen, because I'm showing black and white art here from old school days, you know. But unless you want to see that stuff, I'm not going to be showing anything. There's not going to be no visual presentations of books or web pages or anything like that. That would be insane. But I will have links. All right, I'm going to have a link to every single thing that I talk about here. Every product, every blog, every board, everything. There's hundreds of links, and it's going to be all there for you. You don't need to remember anything. You don't need to take notes. Just sit back and enjoy it, okay? And second, assuming I can figure out how to do this break up the video into chapters thing. I know it's possible. I've never done it before because I've never done a video this long. This way you can digest it like one chunk at a time. So you listen to the intro in the shower, listen to the next couple chapters on the way to work, you know, whatever. Just take your time, dive in. The water's fine. The OSR is a real friendly place, despite what you might have heard. You know, it's not a bunch of old guys screaming at clouds and saying, get off my lawn, and, you know, gatekeeping and all that stuff, you know. So we're real friendly people, okay? You know, the other thing, too, is if Joe Rogan and Lex Friedman and Chris Williams and all those guys, if they could do long-form shows and get millions of listeners and followers and whatnot, why can't someone in the D&D community? Nobody's really doing that. A lot of people get on there and they start ramble for a couple hours, but, you know, there's no focused long-form shows talking about a specific topic, taking like an in-depth, you know, dive into something like that. So I figured there might be a need or a desire for something like this. Besides, you know, the average D&D player, from what I've seen, is pretty freaking smart. If we could play a game that we love for 4 or 5 hours, or back in the day when we used to play all damn day, all weekend, every day, I figured we could listen to, like, you know, me, an old dude, talk about the game we all love for a couple of hours. And I'm not boring. I'm anything but boring, usually. All right? The last thing I'm going to ask you, though. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up, comment, share it with everybody, all your friends who might also be interested. The more you do that, the more YouTube, the algorithm thinks, hey, this is a good video, and it's going to share it around. So if this thing gets shared around, it's going to help the OSR grow. I'll be a happy guy. All right, so let's get into it. All right, first of all, just thank you for everybody who watched my last video. It kind of went viral. I never had a video go viral like this. When I'm recording this now, October 20th, 2024, it's got about 15,000 views. Now, that's nothing for Joe Rogan. He could fart and get that many views, right? But for me, that's, you know, a couple thousand YouTube subscribers. At the time, that's pretty freaking good. So that video is all about Wizards of the Coast's problem with Dungeon Masters. At the end of the video, I said, you know, there is a solution. Just check out the OSR. We got a lot of great DMs, and you can learn a lot from them about how to run the good games. At that point, I also realized that I'm way overdue. I promised a long time ago, for last few months, a detailed introduction to exactly what the OSR is, you know, where it came from, and something to let you know how to get involved in it. And this is what this video is. I'm hoping this is going to be what I call an evergreen video. It's going to be out there forever, standing the test of time. That being said, though, I'm going to update this thing, especially the links page, as Times change, and as you guys let me know anything I missed or anything I should add, that's real important. This is not meant to be like the Encyclopedia Britannica of the OSR. I'm not going to cover every tiny, minute detail of it, right? But I am going to have this video be a really good and thorough introduction into every aspect of it. You might not mention every board or blog, but I'm going to tell you the main ones, okay? And so please, if you see anything I missed or anything that you think might be helpful for others to, hear about, let me know in the comments. I always read the comments, every one. I'm going to check every single comment and decide, whether throw it into the list of links there. So, like I said, the list of links is pretty freaking big. YouTube gives you a sort of size limit as to how many words or characters or whatever you could put in the description. This damn thing blew through that real fast. And so before I even added the links, just the outline alone of this video kind of blew through it. So what I did was I added the link list and the outline to my webpage. And so there is in the description a link to that webpage. It's analogmancave.com. And, because that's what I call this, the Analog Man Cave channel. That's actually that little picture there in the corner. That's my old apartment. that's my throne, my chair, sitting there all surrounded by books and bullshit, lava lamps. And it was like a hippie dive. So I used to call it my little man cave, the Analog Man Cave, because I'm into records and books and all that still, So, yeah, so that's why I call it the Analog Man Cave. Anyway, it's gonna be a decent video, I think, and I'm gonna update everything you give me, and it's gonna be on analogmancave.com. All the links will be there, okay? And on a personal level, I want to give you another reason I'm making the video. It's because I wanted to thank people. I wanted to thank the OSR, everybody involved, in every aspect I've ever interacted with, because almost 20 years ago I started to get into an online scene. It didn't even have a name. The name OSR, Old School Renaissance, that all came later. Through getting involved with everybody, I learned how to be a much better DM and a much better player. I played with amazing people, both as DMs and players and everything. I learned so it was like an exponential growth level. I also made some of my best friends, and I know they're going to be lifelong friends. I still play with them today, and I'm going to play with them when I'm in the freaking nursing home, as long as I could still hop onto Roll20 or roll some dice with my arthritic hands. And I've had some of my most memorable D&D games with these people. I owe so much to the OSR. I figured this is my way to give something back. It's, I don't know how my life's going to go, right? But this might be the magnum opus, the most important video I do in terms of, thanking the OSR and helping bring people into it. So, if I want to make it really good, I want to make it really freaking great. That's what I want to do. So, one thing to know too, I'm going to record this video straight through in one sitting. I'm all coffeeed up. I got water next to me. I'm ready to go. Other than maybe to take a pause to go to the bathroom or something. You're welcome for the pause. You don't need to hear that. It's all going to come pouring out at once. No pun intended. All right. Last thing you need to know before I start is this is going to be a focus on fantasy gaming, specifically around D&D. D&D. I'm going to get into other fantasy games, but I'm not going to get into games like, Gamma World and Traveler, Metamorphosis, Alpha, Boot Hill, all those kinds of things, right? So, getting going here. The most obvious question, after 5 minutes of talking, jerk, get to it, buddy. 7 minutes and 40 seconds, actually. What is the OSR? Is it just a bunch of old guys playing old editions of D&D? That's what a lot of people think. No, it's not a bunch of old cranky bastards just saying, you're doing it wrong, you're doing it wrong. That's not how it is. That's not what it's all about. It's far from it. It's a gaming movement that came about based on what was going on at the time. There is no boss, no king, emperor. There's no pope of the OSR. Sorry, Greg, you're not the pope of the OSR, nor is James Malazewski of Grognardia. There's no boss. It's a very fragmented group of people, but it does have deep roots, and there are really a lot of archetypes, I guess you want to call them, the founders of the OSR. That's what we're going to get into here. Talk about them, okay? The OSR thing is more of a style of game design, and really most importantly, a style of gameplay that the game design sort of lends itself to. It came about as a reaction to what was going on then, back at the time, the early 2000s. So I figured the best way to get a decent understanding of what was going on then was to sort of give you a little history lesson. So hop around the fire, folks, and grab a beer, grab whatever you drink, and listen in here. So I'm going to take a lot of this information, sort of the outline of it a little bit, especially the early stuff, from a really good blog post. It was on a blog called the OSR Simulacrum. And this guy took an historical look at the OSR, written a couple years ago by an actual historian. It's really one of the best posts I've ever seen on the topic. The link to that's going to be included in the list of links on the webpage, like everything else. He actually mentioned my name, my blog's name, the old one. It was called Wondrous Imaginings, and he called it one of the pivotal blogs of the OSR. So I appreciate that. It may be giving me a little bias towards him, but you know, hey, there's also 30 other blogs or so. But really, it is a really great article. Okay, check it out. You know, when you're done with the video, check out everything. All those links. It's cool. So let's talk about gameplay. So when D&D first came out, there wasn't much of a focus on character and story and everything that you see now. There was no, you know, the grand master plan of the story of the adventure or whatever. Back then, the old trope was that you didn't name your character until you hit 3rd or 4th level because you're probably going to die anyway, so why bother? And what you did is seemed to be like you just hopped in a hole in the ground, went into the mythical underworld or whatever. You rolled dice to see if you killed stuff or see if you were killed, and if you lived, you took the monster stuff, and that was it. And the more stuff you got, the better life was, right? And it didn't make a whole lot of sense, and most people back then agreed it didn't need to. It was more like a board game where the board was in your head, all right? So over time, though, these adventures, we called them modules back then, by the way. So whenever, I know I'm going to keep saying module because it's the word I use. It's like an old habit. But adventures or modules, they started to be developed that had like a little bit of a story. They give a plot hook. They give a reason for the characters to be there jumping in the hole and killing things or saving the princess or whatever it was, right? The PCs weren't just like pieces of paper with numbers on them like they used to be. They were actual fictional beings in the players' heads and in this fictional little world that, you know, they were playing in. So modules also started to add something on. It's called box text, right? It's that little bit of narrative, like room 9, and then you have a little box text, and room 9 is described in a box text. You see a large table with 2 golden candles on it. Sitting behind that table is a wizard, and he looks at you with a blah, 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 yeah, that sort of crap, right? So that's the sort of thing they were adding in there, and it was interesting because every wannabe fiction writer who wanted to be the next J.R.R. Tolkien or Raymond Feist or whoever, they really let themselves loose and indulged themselves. And sometimes it was bad, sometimes it was good, but regardless, it was definitely a shift in modules and definitely a shift in the adventures. And then Dragonlance happened, right? Dragonlance was a huge shift. It was a whole story, basically, laid out over like 15 modules. I have them all here. I played it most of them through, and it was fun. But then later, it was actually turned into a series of books that expanded out into a whole fictional universe, like all the other ones, like the Drizzt books and all those other things, right? But it's also where the current day style of adventure paths, or what I call freaking railroads, came from. It's also where the focus of the game shifted from role-playing, where, you know, it was always called role-playing, R-O-L-E, but back in the old days, it was more R-O-L-L. It was just dice. You weren't playing a role. You weren't playing a character, right? So it was like role-playing with 2 L's in the old days, and it shifted to playing an actual role, R-O-L-E, where you played a part in the role or the area you were adventuring in. You were more than just a piece of paper with some numbers on it, right? The game of the day back then was AD&D First Edition, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons First Edition. You know, people were still playing basic D&D, and they're playing in the world of Mystara and all that. That was still a thing. It still is a thing, actually. But AD&D was the reigning king, because who wanted to be basic when you could be advanced? At least that was my mentality. Like, I had to start with basic because, that's where you start, right? You learn the basics, and then you move on to advanced because it's cool. Besides, you got more spells and more abilities and all this other crap, right? So, and AD&D, you know, it's a complex, confusing game when judged by modern layout standards, really. So anyone that tells you OSR is all rules-like games, they're wrong. It's not the game rules that make the game OSR, really. It's the style of play, the style of DMing, the style of how the players, how the players play their PCs more than anything else. For example, I've run a 5th edition campaign with a very old school OSR feel for like 4.5 years. I was able to do it with some lengthy house rules, like 20 pages or whatever, probably, or more. And because my players were all in their 50s, and we all grew up with the original archetypes and influences, and the same ones, watching Conan, reading the Fritz Leiber, reading Lord of the Rings and all that. And we played and viewed D&D the same way, so I was able to do it. It's maybe I actually did the old school D&D with some younger folks too, in both game store and in libraries. I ran 3 different campaigns there, and they picked up on it. So it's not impossible. You just got to be willing to learn and adapt and try new things. Okay, so it's definitely possible. So The rules, like I said, they don't make the game. You could mess with the rules, and as long as you get a good buy-in from the players, you're good to go. And as long as you're a good DM, that's really what it comes down to. If they think the game sucks, they're not going to keep playing with you. And the rules for my homebrew rules for 5e, how to make it more old school, they're also on my webpage there. You can take a look on it. Anyway, speaking of rules, the rules began to change, right? So the first big change is sort of crept in with Unearthed Arcana. There was a thing called Oriental Adventures. There's a Dungeoneer Survival Guide, the Wilderness Survival Guide. The change was the introduction of some sort of a skill system. They were then called non-weapon proficiencies. Like you had a weapon proficiency. You were proficient with the sword, proficient with the dagger, so you could use both of them. But now you had non-weapon proficiencies, so you could like sing or cook or ride a horse or swim. So if you like your 5e skill systems, that's where they came from. They weren't in the game originally. There was no such thing as a skill system or a proficiency system back in the day. So when 2e came out, 2nd edition, these things were firmly embedded into the game, these non-weapon proficiencies. They were an integral part of it. When 3rd edition came out, they were called skills, and they were definitely a part of the game. You want to see if someone's lying? Make a skill check. Want to see if you know that ancient language? Make a skill check. Before that, how we did it was the player had to determine if the NPC was lying. The player, not the PC. You're just using your wits. Read the DM. Read the voice. Read the facial, the body language, the whole thing, and see if do you think he's lying or not. And it required a good DM acting ability, which we had to try to develop, right? Because you wanted to make it an immersive thing. If you wanted to, how do you read this ancient book we found that might have a clue to whatever the hell we're doing? You couldn't just roll the dice and figure it out. You had to go to Greyhawk City and find a sage who could read that script, which is a whole lot of, money, cost, expense, and role playing and all that sort of thing. It was a very different style, right? So these non-weapon proficiencies, which led to skills, changed a lot. But a more important shift happened when 2nd edition came out. It was inspired, I think, by Dragonlance and Lord of the Rings more than anything else. See, in the back of the 1st edition AD&D, Dungeon Master's Guide, there's a thing called Appendix N. That's famous. You're going to hear about Appendix N everywhere, all the time, in the old school. It's basically a list of all the inspirational material, books, really, that Gygax relied on when he made D&D. All right, Lord of the Rings, that was in there, but most of the stuff was what's called Swords and Sorcery. It's R.E. Howard's Conan. It's Fritz Leiber's Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. It's those sorts of things. It's horror stories like Lovecraft and things like that, right? So I'm going to dive in here to a couple sources because they said it far better than I could ever. One, by James Raggi. He's a luminary of the OSR. I'll tell you about him more later. He shares a quote from Matt Finch on his blog. He's the creator of Swords and Wizardry. And again, all the links are in the link page. So here's what James has to say. Or actually, here's what Matt Finch says. He says, a note about sword and sorcery gaming. The sword and sorcery genre of writing presents characters who are morally ambiguous. They're not fighting for the greater good, but they're scrabbling for power and money with only a few scruples. True, they usually had more scruples than the villains, but not by all that much. Swords and Wizardry is designed for the swords and sorcery genre, where the characters begin as a seedy band of tomb robbers and mercenaries. Along the way, these characters might become more respectable and morally conscientious as they gain wealth and lands, but they might not. Swords and Wizardry, introduction by Matt Finch. That's an older introduction by an older Swords and Wizardry version by Matt. Another quote that shows how it affects sort of the style of gaming, right? Because it's all about survival and whatnot, by Stuart Marshall, who wrote OSRIC. And he said, his quote is, the slaughter will continue until play improves. So when the play improves, the slaughter will stop. I like that. So, the other thing, too, if you talk about heroic fantasy, D&D that you're doing now, if you do a word search in the original AD&D Player's Handbook, you're only going to see one place, I think, where the word hero or any derivation of hero, like heroic, even appears. I think it's as a title for a fighter of a certain level. AD&D and everything before it, it's not a heroic game. It's not about being heroes and saving the world and all that stuff. Gygax did have some Tolkien stuff in there. It was mostly the drawing Tolkien fans to buy the books, I think, honestly. It wasn't that, he didn't base it on Tolkien. It's not that what it was all about back then. Another thing happened with the 2nd edition. See, there was something in the 80s called the Satanic Panic. It's a bunch of lunatic people, from the Bible Belt, I think, who were mothers and ministers and priests and fathers, and they decided that playing D&D was a gateway to Satanism. You will become a disciple of our Lord Satan. if you play D&D. This thing popped up everywhere in the news. It was on 60 Minutes. It was huge. I mean, it was Guy Gex had to be interviewed on 60 Minutes back then. You can still find that interview somewhere. I don't have a link for that, but just Google that shit. GTS. So, guess what happens when you tell a kid he shouldn't do something because it's bad or evil? Yes. Yeah. The sales went through the freaking roof. All right. Everybody knew you can't do it. I shouldn't do it. Bad, evil, buy it. Right. And so TSR, who owned D&D at the time, had to come up with some PR bullshit code of ethics. I've links to it, and so the early ones and what came after in the page. This is actually a little true story here. My friend who got me into D&D when I was like 14 in high school, his parents went nuts on the whole satanic panic thing. It was 84, right? So they went crazy. They took all his books, but the funny thing was that they paid him for all his books. They look at the list price and paid him the value because they wouldn't just take it and throw it out, right? They figured, oh, fair is fair. And so he comes up to me and says, hey, Joe, here's, like $300 or whatever it is. Here's the mail order catalog. Here, I filled out the form. Order all these books for me that I just got thrown out. And I did, and I got him, and I gave it to him. He just kept him in his locker at school the whole time, so he didn't have to worry about it. He just never brought that shit home, so it was fantastic. So, Kurt, thank you, because it wasn't for you, buddy, I would not be playing D&D, man. I appreciate you more than you could ever imagine. So, anyway, the whole code of ethics, that shit was ignored, all right? It was just something they showed to, priests and mothers and media and all that kind of stuff, right? It was really a set of design principles, like good shall always triumph over evil. There's no nudity or sex or drug use. There's no painting law enforcement in a bad light. You cannot imitate criminal activity. In other words, they don't want to teach you how to be a real criminal. In the meantime, you look at something like the Thieves of Lankmar. It tells you exactly how to pull a heist off. Right? There's no slavery, no alcohol. The last one's funny. The trope is every D&D adventure starts in a bar or a tavern or an inn. What, there's no freaking alcohol? First thing I do when I'm playing is getting a beer. Especially when you're 14, you can't drink in real life. Now the first thing I do when I play D&D is open a beer for real while my character's in the tavern. As for criminal activity, isn't every dungeon crawl just like a home invasion from the monster's point of view? All that shit was ignored, right? First edition all through the 80s and into the mid-90s, really, all up until second edition. So with second edition, they really embraced it fully. They renamed Devils and Demons to Batazu and Tanari or some stupid-ass name. They got rid of the Assassin class, lots of spells that were deleted or changed that summoned demons, crap like that. So this is really a stark contrast as to how the game used to be played and who the players were inspired to play their PCs like back in the day. Now most players lean into Lord of the Rings archetypes and the newer archetypes that go into gamers' heads these days, like Harry Potter and all that kind of stuff and other things I don't even understand. I honestly, because I'm not young and cool anymore, right? I never was cool, but I'm not young anymore. So before though, it was like swords and sorcery archetypes, right? Now, one of the premier blog of the OSR was called Grognardia, James Maslewski. I'll get into that a little bit more later, as well as the 2000 Coppers issue. But he had a lot to say about things, and he was pretty freaking smart, despite some of the flaws. Now, he talked about the influences of various like pulp fantasy and swords and sorcery on pre-second edition Dungeons and Dragons, and he broke it down with a few bullet points. The first is the protagonists, not heroes, the protagonists are rogues, not the rogue class, but rogue by character. I'm not interpreting here, but he says the rogues, by which I mean outsiders generally of low station, though not necessarily low birth, who live on the margins of society. He said that said society is generally corrupt or at least venal. Consequently, the protagonists generally pursue personal betterment, whether monetary, secret knowledge, position, etc., rather than more noble goals. Despite this, the protagonists sometimes achieve noble or at least broadly beneficial goals in the course of their pursuit of personal betterment. The world is generally humanocentric, where non-humans are relegated to the margins, which is why the protagonists often interact with them. Magic is at best unreliable and at worst downright dangerous, if not morally dubious, i.e., summoning demons. And so he's done there. And so just to touch base too about death, man. Death at the PC in old school games, it was ever present. Success was never guaranteed. It was a miracle if you survived a long time. It took player skill, not just the PC abilities on that piece of paper in front of you. Maybe the best post I've ever seen on this overall, it comes from James Raji, he OSR luminary. he wrote a famous essay called "I Hate Fun." You'll see the link to that as well. This is a little bit long blurb, and actually he did a he recorded a video of himself reading it with no shirt on, which is a little bit scary. And then so in any case, take a look at the video, and there's a link to that too. God help you, get a good stiff one in you before you watch that shit. But so I'm going to read the bit here that really relates to what I'm talking about. He says, now, take the introduction to the Menser Basic set. That's the red box back in the day. It is the finest introduction for D&D that was ever penned, explaining the basics of everything from classes and their abilities to combat in just 7 pages of story form prose, not rules blather. And the first time D&D player has an 80% chance to fail that saving throw against Bargle's spell. An 80% chance of losing. Alina, the cleric you meet there, Alina dies. You can't save her. You must run from the ghouls or you die. Some would say that traditional Dungeons & Dragons was poorly designed because first level characters were weak and that there was an uneven playing experience. It never seems to occur to these people that traditional Dungeons & Dragons was designed perfectly and that play experience was intentional. Menser's introduction shows what Dungeons & Dragons is all about, and it's not flashy heroism. It was never about that until Gygax was removed. You're not playing a game pretending to navigate your playing piece, called the character, through some story where you get to be the hero. You're using the rules to pretend to be someone and experience and react as that person would through a dangerous world. Nothing more and nothing less. If you want to be a hero, then you get to try. The guarantee success is to defeat the entire purpose of role-playing. Some will try to say that each edition of D&D is based on the common fantasy tropes of the time it was released. That's just ignorant bullshit. I agree, James. Dungeons & Dragons was built on classic archetypes, which some game elements added on, and literature that was decades, in some cases almost a century old by the time Dungeons & Dragons came around. It was built to be timeless, not timely. And some of the more important influences, say Liber and Lovecraft, certainly didn't feature success as a common theme. And it certainly wasn't all honor and glory, what with Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser and Coleman and Cudgel being thieves and worse as far as Conan is concerned. Yet the focus wasn't limited. There was still the influence of Tolkien and Paul Anderson and Lord Dunsany for the more positive, even dreamier sides of fantasy. You could go all in with Dungeons & Dragons back in the day. Nothing was excluded. And that's what Dungeons & Dragons was, focused through the rules that sprung out of the wargaming culture. As the game was altered through the years, this was lost. I don't know why it was decided that games sold in the form of number-filled books with fancy vocabulary would appeal more to people that didn't care to actually read literature, but that's what happened. The real choice in the matter of gameplay was lost, the release obscured and made more difficult to achieve. And I think you saw about railroads here and adventure paths, all the while increasing the options for individual characters. That was the real trick, giving players the illusion of more choice and increasing the detail and complexity of the rules while slapping the handcuffs on the game itself. Brilliant, fuckers. Trying to imitate Raji as much as I can. I know I can't quite touch him. Anyway, he continues. But while Gygaxian D&D was forged from classic stories with the perfect capacity to deal with the current fads, and that's where Tolkien comes into D&D as a secondary hip source to lure the kiddies in, not as a core component, the next generation of clueless imbeciles decided to tell us what D&D was all about. It inevitably led, as did most fantasy fiction, to using Tolkien as the core, grand quests, heroics, and then it fed on itself. D&D became literature because there were so many frickin' D&D books. Drizzt, hello. Which then influenced the game. D&D basically created most of the video game and personal computing industries. You think people at home were upgrading their computers to play the neat new version of Space Invaders, where they wanted the sweet, sweet graphics from a particular version of Bard's Tale, which was easier to pick up and play with no investment of time or knowledge. And so then D&D took from that as well. If it was done to add to the current influences, maybe it would have worked. But the new influences replaced the influences that created D&D. And what's more, the modern influences are seen as competition, so aren't even explicitly mentioned. So D&D becomes more and more of an ungrounded adventure game, designed to be mindless entertainment, to only be taken seriously by the professionals who will lay out a specific path to fun. So, that's Raji. All right, there you're getting a little gist of Raji's voice. You definitely got to subscribe to his YouTube channel. All right, he's a cool dude. Now, so after all this, I'm hoping you get a feel for the vibe of old school D&D, where this is where the OSR stems from, right? The other notable thing about old school games was that you got most of your XP from the treasure you claimed. right? Fighting was too dangerous. Death came easy. Why fight? Just find a way to get the loot. Remember in Conan, the Conan the Destroyer, the whole thing was about getting that gem from the snake. He didn't want to go in there and fight the snake. He had to fight the snake because shit went wrong because it's freaking Conan. But he just wanted to get the damn big-ass gem, all right? So the money, the loot, that was the true measure of success. Going back to the inn with the bag of gold, and you could buy drinks and basically live like a baller for a while until like money ran out, and you had to go out there and steal some more. Right? You weren't heroically killing Smog, but you were trying to get his treasure without having to fight him. Also, there weren't any milestone rewards for XP. With loot as the motivation, you could see where the focus of gameplay is an entirely different direction than maybe modern day players are used to. Loot was like 9/10 of your XP that most PCs gained. If you had 100,000 XP, like 10K, 10K was from like killing shit, and you didn't get much from killing shit, by the way. And most of it was for loot. So if you got and you got more loot back then too. You have things calling a few hundred copper pieces or a few hundred gold pieces rather might be guarded by a freaking snake or something like that. So why did the OSR come about? It was a revolt, really, to this heroic shift, and a revolt against the rules bloat of like the 3.0, 3.5 Pathfinder era. There was a rule for everything, and it acted as like a straitjacket as to what you could or couldn't do. People started talking about it in older games in various places like boards and blogs and all that, and I'll get into that later. And they started reminiscing about the old days and ways of playing, and they just started just writing essays and talking about it and sharing ideas. All right, and this is where it started. And then in 2008, Gary Gygax died, and in 2009, Dave Arneson died. And the loss everybody back then felt was hard to describe, guys. These guys, they made a game that influenced all of our lives in a huge, enormous way. Many of us ran like old games back then just as a tribute for like nostalgia. I don't know how many people were posting about, I ran Redbox today, or ran BX, or, ran OD&D or AD&D, and I had a great freaking time, and blah, 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 and this happened. And they were telling game stories. A lot of times they got back with their old group if they could, they got them out of, it's like, hey, schedule this, tell the wife and kids you're busy Sunday night, we're going to play D&D the old school, get your old character out if you still got them, right, that sort of thing. And they just love the games, and so people had this desire to play these old school games. They wanted to get into it. They wanted to just get in, start playing again, And so after that, retroclones were developed. And I'll get into that a little later on. And these are basically reproductions of our old original games that were better presentation, better layout. What's more, though, you could publish for these games. You could write a module. The module that you ran in 1984 that you could juice up and spice up and make it look cool now that you're older and understand things, right, 20, 30 years later, you could actually publish this thing and get it out there and make $1.50, right? But more often than not, people just shared shit. It was a very much like, I don't know, just share here, try this, take this, enjoy this, right? And we didn't get into publishing until much later. But this is where the OSR was really born, right? So that's what happened. That's where it came from in a nutshell. So after all this yakking along here, what is the OSR? Jack asked Joe, you still haven't told us. What is the definition? Give me the definition. Give me something I could write down here. Well, there is no freaking definition. There's none, at least, that's going to satisfy everybody, right? So if you're looking for a one-sentence succinct thing, and it's not going to happen. There never will be one. But I hope I've conveyed a good sense of what the style of gameplay is. The best thing I've ever read on the subject of the gameplay style is written by Matt Finch. He's widely considered to be the godfather of the OSR. He wrote something called the Old School Primer. There's a free version in the link on the page, and he recently updated it. He had a Kickstarter for the Swords and Wizardry Book of Options he just released. It's honestly worth getting the book just for that. Since at the time of the video, he just filled the Kickstarter. I got my book a few weeks ago. It'll be up on his website soon. I'm sure you could buy it and get a copy of it, but there's a link for his website too. Anyway, he's updated the primer for the 5e crowd. The link on my description there is for the original one, and you get the gist of it. But really, this book, get the Book of Options when it comes out. He really optimizes it for newer players, because I think it was originally written in the 3rd edition days, or maybe during the days of the edition which shall not be named, the number which comes between 3 and 5. That game was a freaking abomination. Enough said. Anyway, Matt says that there are 4 Zen moments people need to reach to really truly understand old school games. The first one he calls rulings, not rules. And I'm reading a quote here from the newer book, first paragraph basically. He says, rulings, not rules. I believe that the defining characteristic of an old school system is that it's improvisational, played mostly with rulings, not rules. As mentioned above, old school systems don't have many rules for the players to learn. Most of the rules are for the referee, and they are really guidelines, not rules. The player can choose whether or when to apply these rules, and the players rely on the referee. And he calls it a referee. Back in the day, it was DMs were called referees, and the players rely on a referee to be impartial when doing so. And he gets into way more detail describing what that means, because you can't just understand truly from that paragraph, but you get the gist. The next Zen moment is player skill, not character ability. Before 2nd edition, D&D didn't have any kind of generalized skill system for things like athletics, acrobatics, arcane knowledge, animal handling, deception, and so on. There also wasn't a formalized ability check. There were a few skill-like abilities hardwired into the character classes. Thieves had several skills like climb walls and find traps, and rangers had a system for following tracks. For the most part, though, skills like these didn't have a specific rule, and this is the main area where old-school D&D was, as we just discussed, mainly improvisational. So how do you know if your character can do something? You tell the referee what you want to try. Most referees will give you an idea of the probabilities, and most will entertain a reasonable discussion about whether the first guess at a probability is fair. In other words, you can try to bullshit and barter the DM. And he says, you're not going to do that. Well, I got this and that and the other thing. What if I tried this? Well, maybe it lessens the chance. That's what he's getting at here, okay? Third, heroic, not super heroic. Old school games have a human-sized scale, not a superpowered scale. At first level, adventurers are barely more capable than a regular person. They live by their wits. This isn't linked to the fact that old school rules are generally more improvisational and less rules heavy than modern ones, but I think it's a common enough aspect of old school gaming tables to mention here. And the fourth, game balance. Risk and reward in an old school game are based on when or where you are, not who you are. There is no balance, basically is what he's saying here. Here we go. He says, the old style campaign is within a fantasy world with all its perils, contradictions and surprises. It's not a game setting which will somehow always produce the right challenges of just the right difficulty for the party's level of experience. The party has no right only to encounter monsters they can defeat. No right only to encounter traps they can disarm. No right to invoke a particular rule from the books, and no right to a die roll in every particular circumstance. This sort of situation is not a mistake in the rules. He then goes, like I said, he goes into much greater detail in the book in describing it. So if you're coming from 5e, pick up the Swords and Wizardry Book of Options. It's a must-have, as well as the Swords and Wizardry Complete Rulebook. The links are in the page. And like I said, it should be out there soon. If you're watching this the day I drop it, it should be out there soon, I'm sure. So that's the overview of, what is the OSR. Hope you got a sense of it, a gist of it. You're never going to get a definition of it, but I hope you got the vibe, you got the feel. All right. So now we're going to get into a deep dive into every aspect of the OSR. We're going to finish up with how to get into it. All right. So sit back, get a beer, and enjoy. All right, everybody, here's part 2, the old school games. Not the OSR games, the old school games that the OSR sort of derives their influences from, right? So I'm going to break this into 2 parts of these old school games. The first, obviously, the D&D games, the big gorilla in the room there. And the next was all the other types, all right? So a little bit of a history with the D&D games and all the other ones, too. So I'm into history if you haven't noticed. So the first game was obviously original D&D, all right, the little brown books, all right. There was basically 3 skinny-ass books that were based on the chainmail rule system, and there was another little fantasy rule book there that if you could understand that shit, you were either smoking something really good or you were just a prodigy in some way. But it's what started it all. And weirdly enough, the OD&D books were so strange and so vague, and people couldn't figure it out. But they had something about them that let people know that, hey, there's something cool here, and I'm going to try to figure it out. And if I can, I'm going to make that shit up on my own. It was the 70s, you're coming off the hippie days, right? It was more freewheeling, more experimental, 74. So it was a different time. They had a different headspace. They had a different mentality than people do today. There was no organized play dates, for example. There was no rules about everything like there are today. It was a whole different time, a whole more free-spirited thing. And I think that the rules in OD&D lent itself to that free-spirited thinking, because there's so many people. Like you talk about Raymond Feist. He wrote those the Rift War books back in the day. I met with the dude, a really cool fucking guy, by the way. He wrote the Rift War books, and he talked about his original game based on OD&D, and I think he was like, they're just indecipherable rules, so they just made shit up to fit in. And everybody had to house rule it because, you know, you had to make the game your own, literally. Make it the way you wanted. It was so, the structure was there that you can get something out of it, and then you just made that shit your own, right? And so that was OD&D. Now, as like I said, guys, I'm giving you links for all these different things over at Drive-Thru. You can buy all these books. For some of them, I'm only going to give you a link for the first book, like the Player's Manual for Beckme and all that. But you know, you could buy all these books over there. So just click on the web page. Now, it's from Wizards of the Coast, and you're funding Wizards of the Coast. So if you hate Wizards of the Coast, you may want to investigate other ways to acquire the PDFs, or maybe buy them used or something like that. Right? I'm not saying steal, but I'm just saying. All right. Anyway. So the next book that came out was the Holmes D&D. Now, for the life of me, I cannot find a copy of where to purchase the Holmes edition of D&D. This guy Holmes, though, I think he was a shrink. He was a psychiatrist or something like that, or a teacher. He was a smart dude, and he approached Gary and said, "Hey, you know what? I wanna write this in a way that I can understand. Maybe help as a teaching method or something like that." And Gary oh yeah, sure, go. He's a smart dude. Let him write it, right? And so he wrote this book, Holmes D&D. It took you from levels 1 to 3, and it kind of used the OD&D system as a base, but it was a much more simpler version, better layout. It made more sense. You could sort of track it. And a lot of old school guys, not too many people can really honestly claim they started with OD&D, but many, many, many guys can say they started with Holmes, all right? There wasn't too many, published versions of OD&D, the original box set. So anybody who tells you OD&D, look at it, but take it with a grain of salt. Give them the hairy eyeball and just say, yeah, okay, maybe, right? That means you were what, 2.5 men, baby? Yeah, right. So anyway, the Holmes D&D, though, that started a lot of folks who were in the old school scene off on D&D, and it was a much simpler version. Like, for example, everybody got 6 hit points per level when they leveled up, D6, and every weapon did a D6 damage, no matter great sword or a little dagger, D6 damage. That's the kind of level we're talking about. But it had a little model adventure in there, the Xenopus Tower or something like that, and you got a little, you got an example to play. You could finally see, all right, this is how it's supposed to be run. This is an example of play, finally. Because back then, don't forget, no internet, right? I don't think Dragon Magazine was maybe new. People didn't really get an example of play. They couldn't see people do it, so you're all trying to figure it out. So Holmes brought you that example, right? And then the next thing that came out after Holmes, Holmes, by the way, is supposed to lead right to AD&D. I don't know how the hell the translation from Holmes to AD&D was supposed to go, because AD&D's complexity dwarfs Holmes' simplicity, but whatever, Gary. It was supposed to be the feeder to AD&D. So the next ones that came out was BX, they call it, because it was Basic and Expert, all right? There were supposed to be, I think, 3 books in the series, Basic, Expert, and Companion. I don't know why they would name the third one Companion. It makes no freaking sense to me. The Companion doesn't evoke anything special, but Companion, okay, man. So Basic and Expert did come out, and they were good. They were better laid out. They had more detail than the Holmes editions did. And the first one took you to like level 3, and the second one took you to level 14. Introduced new classes, new spells, all that sort of thing. So it was good. It was really good. A lot more people in the OSR started with BX. I didn't see a copy of BX until the freaking 90s when a friend gave it to me, and it was the little red box basic book. And I'm like, what the hell is this? That's not the Menser book that I have. I had no idea it even existed. That's how it wasn't on my radar, because I was, I was an 84 start guy, right? That was the Menser red box. But anyway, the BX books were good. And most of the retro clones and the most popular retro clones in the OSR, Old School Essentials, for example, Labyrinth Lord, are based on the BX edition of the game. It was a good game. It was a good version of the game, and a lot of modules that came out with it, especially Keep on the Borderlands. That was a seminal module that was introduced with you got the module in the box, right? And so many people, I think millions of this module was published, and so many people started there. Guy actually wrote an introduction to Keep on the Borderlands that was epic. Told you how to run the game, how to be a DM, and this and that. So that was a really, really good guide, because Gygax did not write the BX books. Other people did. Moldvane Cook. Now, there's supposed to have been a companion book, like I said, and it never got published. But Steve Marsh, who was supposed to be writing it, I was at North Texas RPG a couple years ago, and I'm sitting there doing a live stream with Eric Tankar, and Steve Marsh walks up, drops the companion book that he would have written back then right on the table next to me. I'm like drooling. I'm like, this is the book? This is the book. Holy crap. And I had a beer with him, talked about it later, and, we got to see it. I don't know where the hell it is and what's it going to be published or whatever the case may be, but it's out there somewhere floating around in the ether. Who knows? We might see it someday. So he's a cool dude. Anyway. Next book, Beck Me. All right, it wasn't a book; it was a series of a series of box sets. BECMI stands for Basic, Expert, Companion, Master, and Immortals. So this is the series of books that Frank Menser sort of pioneered, spearheaded, that took you from first level to godhood, right? And it was a good set of books. I mean, we went through Basic and Expert, and I think that's where I started with the Menser Red Box, and that's what James Araji was talking about earlier, that introduction. It was so good. I think that BX was written for older folks, I think, really, honestly. College or late teens. Basic, I think Gary was like, I want some 10-year-olds to play this shit, right? And Basic was written for 10 and up, and it really was. I mean, Basic, BX might have said 10 and up, but Menser Redbox definitely was for 10 and up. It was such a good story. It was such a good book at the beginning that you're trying out. It was you get to roll the dice and play and save Lena and all this stuff, and Bargle kills you. It tries to kill you, and you might die in it. It was riveting, and a part of it was if you do this, go to page 30, go to number 32, and if you do this, it was like a follow along game, by the numbers. It was really neat. And then you get into the game. Excellent book, and all the Beck Me rules were sort of capstoned by what's called the Rules Cyclopedia. It's a hardcover book that came out that sort of got all the rules together from all the Beck Me books, put it in one place. All right, it took away a lot of the fluff, the description, and all that stuff. It was mainly a rules tome, but it was nicely laid out. And really, you didn't need the Beck Me stuff. You could just look up in the Rules Cyclopedia. Everything was in there, plus some, I think. So that was pretty cool. Now, while BX and Beck Me were going on, there was another train of books, another series called Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, right? Advanced Dungeons and Dragons was Gary's answer, Gary's fuck you, really, to Dave Artisan, because Dave wanted more of a share of the profits. Dave wasn't that involved with TSR, but he's like, hey, I helped you design this shit. I want half, right? Just like a divorce. I want half, right? So he wanted his money, but he wasn't doing the work. I guess they were pissed. It's all about money, like everything else, right? It's fucking sad, honestly. It all comes down to money like that. But he was an instrumental guy, Dave, in creation. Without Dave, this D&D wouldn't exist. He brought it to Gary. Gary took it and called it later. I think he called it Indecipherable. Blah 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 blah. There's floating around out there in the ether too. I think maybe a copy of his of the original stuff that he brought to Gary. I don't know. It's allegedly, who knows, right? But anyway, Gary started AD&D. He purposely wanted to make it more complicated and very different than D&D, so that he didn't have to pay any more to any more money to Arneson. So that was it. And so it was complicated. It was more technical. And Gary didn't even fucking play AD&D by the rules. He made his own shit up, right? I mean, he wrote it, but he made his own shit up. Now, what's good about AD&D though? Honestly, the best thing about it, in fact, is if you only get one thing, if you're a poor ass guy out there and you want to buy and get into the old school scene, and you're only going to get one book to start you off with, buy the AD&D First Edition Dungeon Master's Guide. It's Gary's words of wisdom and knowledge about how to run D&D, how to do it, how to interpret it, right? It's a great book. And you can't go wrong, honestly, with that book. I can't tell you how many hours, countless hours I've just spent reading that thing. Man, it's the best shitterial in the world. Shitterial, reading material, where you're taking a shit. Best shitterial in the fucking world, all right? So you just get that book and read it, guys. And we'll get into later on about, all the good things you should have on your shelf if you get into the old school. But that's a hint. That's the very first one on the list. And then a lot of people are going to be pissed at me because I'm adding second edition AD&D into this list of all the TSR games that are old school. But like I was describing before, it did have some classic elements. It was just sort of like, I don't know, pussified is the best word I can use to describe the thing, right? Real pussified. So AD&D second edition, get it. That's the game I'm actually running now. I run this with the old school guys. Everybody in the Random Party Generator, every other Friday night show that we do, most of them plus some more are in my AD&D second edition campaign. We're doing it for like a year and a half now. So it's a fun game, and of course I house ruled it. I promised it was a game without house rules because they know I'm famous for infamous for my house rules and how long they are. And I promised no house rules. I'm going to run it by the book, and the house rules are up to 19 pages. I refuse to let them get to 20 pages. The more I add, I just shrink the font. So anyway, check that out too. So those are the TSR games that sort of the foundation of the old school, an explanation of where they came from and all that. You can check Wikipedia if you want the details of when they were released and all that bullshit. But this is just gives you an overview of all those games and what they were all about, right? Now, here's a bunch of other games that people say are from the old school, the old days, right? That were sort of like released around the same time as D&D, old school D&D was being run and played. And a lot of people played these games too. Tunnels and Trolls. I know that Eric Tankar has good stories about Tunnels and Trolls and being the creator and all that. I think that Rob got yelled at or something, or Tim got yelled at by the guy because they were trying to role play their character, and the guy who invented it didn't know what the hell they were talking about. So Tunnels and Trolls, pick up that book. It's on drive-through. Get the 5th edition. That was the one people were playing back then. I don't know what the hell edition they're up to now, but get the 5th edition if you want to get an understanding. It was a different rule system, a different rule set. I have a copy on the shelf here. It's interesting. It's really interesting to read through, but you get a feel for it. You know what I mean? And you get to see why. Yeah, it's in the same vibe as all the old D&D stuff, right? Another one is GURPS. GURPS, generic universal role-playing system or something like that. Yeah, oh fuck, I typed GURPS wrong on my little outline here. Good thing I'm reading it. GURPS, 3rd edition. Get the 3rd edition one. And also, if you're going to get GURPS 3rd edition, get Compendium 1 and 2. All right, get Compendium 1 and 2 to go along with it. And that's on drive-through as well. Another one, Stormbringer. Now, Appendix N talks about Elric, written by Elric of Melniboné, and it's written by Michael Moorcock. Elric it's like the anti-King Arthur, basically. He's sickly, he's weak, he's evilish, to say the least. He's a force of chaos, In fact, all the law and chaos of D&D, that alignment system, you wonder where it comes from? Elric. That's where Gary stole it, borrowed, used it from. All right, Elric books. So you get an understanding of the chaos. The laws around chaos and neutrality and law and all that stuff. So I got to take a drink here. I'm talking so damn much. So get those books. But anyway, Stormbringer from Chaosium. That's the one to get. It's on Noble Knight. All right. And for a lot of these guys, I'm just giving you a link to the Noble Knight webpage. Not to the specific book because I don't know if they're in stock or not. But if you go to nobleknight.com, NOBLEKNIGHT.com, again, links are on the page. Check it out. Noble Knight has all of the things you ever want to buy but can never get when you were a kid, all right? Because you were broke. Your paper just didn't afford you the luxury of it. You can buy all these old used copies and whatnot there. A lot more money you probably would have paid back then, but still, if you want to get it now, you're a baller now, you got the money, do it up, guys. So I got a link to Noble Knight in there for a lot of these things I'm talking about. Next one, Pendragon, King Arthur based. Another one is called Thieves World. That's based on a series of books. It was kind of interesting. What Thieves World did was they brought in a bunch of authors to sort of write stories set in the same setting, a little thieves-based city, and they could use other guys' characters in there. So if you wrote a book about Sam and somebody wrote a book about Pete, the guy who wrote the book about Pete could talk about Sam and bring him into the story. And it was a pretty cool thing. At first, 9 books. And so they came up with a Thieves World setting. I think eventually went to shit because everybody started killing off everybody else's characters in their own stories or something I heard. But I read the first 6 and they were really fucking good. Tim loves this. Tim Shorts from Gothridge Manor. He's running us in a Scorn campaign, a city of Scorn. And he takes a lot of inspiration from Thieves World books, how he runs it. By the way, every Monday night, check out my channel at 7 o'clock Eastern. You're going to see a masterclass in how to run an old school campaign. He's running Shadowdark, all right, and he's running us through this thing, a bunch of us, and it's really freaking fun. So anyway, we'll plug that later too. But yeah, so that's what Thieves World is all about. And the cool thing was it was setting non-specific, or rule set non-specific rather. It was just a setting. And then later on they came out with, okay, if we're running Shadowdark in AD&D, here's the stats for the barber. If running it in in GURPS, here's the stats for the barber for GURPS, that sort of thing, right? So All right, another one is called Rollmaster. Now, Rollmaster was holy shit complicated. Uh, holy shit. I have the Rollmaster books here. I mean, they got critical tables that are like 1,000,000 pages long. Down to such detail as you lose a finger, you lost your left toe on this roll, you lost your right toe on that roll. I mean, that kind of level, I'm exaggerating, that level of detail. The reason I got into Rollmaster was from MERPS, Middle Earth Role-Playing System. It was based in It was based in the Rollmaster system, but it was how to play, Middle Earth, how to play in the world of Middle Earth. And it was, I could never figure that shit out now. I mean, the old man brain and shit. But back then it was fun yet complicated then, even like age 16. But for my money, the MERPS Middle Earth stuff is some of the best you're ever going to find out there. Unfortunately, you can't buy it anymore anywhere as it may be used. There might be PDFs floating around, just saying. But check it out if you want some really good resource material for any Middle Earth game you're ever going to play. The next one, a really big one, guys, it was a Warhammer Fantasy RPG. You guys all know about the Warhammer system. It's basically based on, a fantasy war, outer space, miniature game on the tabletops, right? But somebody decided, let's do a fantasy role-playing game based in that universe. And so they came out with a Warhammer Fantasy role-playing game. Second edition is the best edition if you're going to play that. And there was an adventure module series. It was one of the earlier ones. I don't know if they took inspiration from Dragonlance, but there were 6 adventures in it called The Enemy Within. It's widely considered one of the best old school adventure series ever. You could grab it, adapt it for your game or anything like that. Look for The Enemy Within. I believe there were 6 of them. There's been various iterations of it that were put out over the years. I'm not sure which one is the best, but Carl Sargent wrote at least one of the books in that series, and he's, for my money, the best RPG supplement writer I've ever come across. He and I are simpatico brain-wise in terms of how we view how things should run. All right, so pick that up, the Enemy Within series. Next is Tekkamul, the Empire of the Petal Throne stuff. It's set in Tekkamul, the world of Tekkamul. M.A.R. Barker was the guy's name, and he created a whole fantasy setting, essentially. It was pretty fucking cool. And Gygax got word of it, and he ended up publishing it, I think, back in the day. It's a different kind of a setting to adventure in. It was really, really neat. And I think that Ray Feist actually based, unconsciously, I think, some of his stuff on Tekkamul because his DM was running things in his game that Feist based his later fiction on Tekkamul, but Feist didn't realize that the guy was using Tekkamul as a basis for the game they were running. So Feist grabbed a lot of Tekkamul crap, put it into his stories, and is like, wait, that was Tekkamul? I didn't know. So that sort of thing, right? Then he got a couple of things, another one called Palladium. I have it on the shelf. I got it, honestly, I got it because it was something I always wanted to get because it was advertised in the old Dragon magazine, but I never actually played it or really took a deep dive into it. Another game is Arduin. Somebody recently gifted me with that. It's a big role-playing system and setting and everything. Different and interesting. It's worth a dive into to understand it. They have a different approach to doing a lot of things. And last is RuneQuest, of which they based ElfQuest on too. So check that out as well, guys. So anyway, that's a deep dive into all of the games back in the day that we would consider old school games, okay? Next, we're going to get into, I guess, the start, where the OSR started on all the message boards back in the day. All right, so that's the next one. All right, guys, so message boards. What the hell are they? It's like a bulletin board system. I think it started, the derivation of message boards were back in the old dial-up modem days where you logged into BBSs, right, on people's various computers. And that's once the internet kicked in, they sort of got rid of those. I remember those things. They were kind of fun. Downloading things at a 2800 baud. But anyway, when the internet kicked in, they sort of went onto the internet in a different format. They were, message boards, basically. Same sort of thing, but everybody could log in at one time and mess around there. You wouldn't limit it to whoever dialed in at that time because there's only one who could post, right? So they really exploded. There was a bunch of them around back then that were really seminal in the foundation of the OSR. Let me start this off, though, with mentioning 2 boards that you really don't need to go to. They're probably pretty popular right now. N-World, E-N-World, whatever you call it, and then RPG-Net, right? They're probably the 2 bigger boards that are going on right now. And truly back in the day, they did have some old school activity. Whatever they had then is probably not useful because most people just left because they got ridiculous. I mean, they got strict and started censoring shit before it was even popular. Ian World especially, they suck. honestly. And if you go there now and get 5e content, fine, do whatever, learn it, do whatever you got to do, learn something, but move on. You're not going to find anything old school there, and that's that. I mean, I remember I would post long posts there, thought pieces, things that were more appropriate perhaps for a blog, and people would bust my chops and say, don't post this here, I want to hear this. They wanted like one paragraph post, and you're just like, go make your own fucking blog. Then EN World came up with their own blog system. I started doing it there, and it's like, what the hell with you? That's when I started my blog in 2008 on Blogger, right? So, and RPGNet was always shit. Honestly, they always suck, and the mods suck there. So don't bother with them. Now, the blogs that were the most important back in the day, though, one was ODD74. And again, all links to the current incarnation of these blogs are live. I say current incarnation because ODD74 had an older blog, and then they moved it to a different blog format or something, but blah, blah, blah. So anyway, you can get onto ODD74. As the name implies, it was mostly about old Dungeons & Dragons, original Dungeons & Dragons, 1974 edition. People were talking a lot about it back then and wanted to, just get into the nitty-gritty of it. And I think, a lot of the luminaries of the OSR started there. It was like the main blog that they really hit on. They just get into the nuts and bolts of it and what was it all about. They got into the theory of D&D and of the game design and everything. So that was a worthy place to hit back then. It was kind of an intellectual place more so than a shit stirring place. If you wanted a shit stirring place, that's where you go to the RPG site. It was sometimes described as the Moss Isley spaceport of the OSR. It's not that bad though. It's more like a bunch of curmudgeonly old guys arguing about shit. But we started good. Every conversation got good, and then it always evolved. At the end of the good stuff, it evolved into like fuck you and fuck you. It was that sort of thing. But it was like the Irish brothers. They beat the shit out of each other, and then they go and hug each other and cry and have a beer together afterwards. It was like that, right? If you want an explanation, maybe the best representation, if you've ever seen that movie, Secondhand Lions, those two old guys sitting on the porch, that's what it was all about. That's the best vibe I could, put for the RPG site. And the RPG Pundit, you have his channel out there now on YouTube too. He owns it and ran it back then too. Light moderation, so that was good. He just trusted us not to be dicks. And, there's different levels of dicks. And his was a broad level of dicks. So it was a fun place. Big site. First place I met a lot of these guys that I got onto was Dragon's Foot. That was a site focused on the AD&D game mostly first, sometimes second, but mostly first edition. And right even to this day, you can go there and have good discussions and see old discussions. Everything is still there about, the game. You see my old posts, Matt Finch's old post, he was there as Mythmere. Everybody was there talking about the game. It was fun. It was a good place. It was a fun place to get into. And if I remember right, they have resources there. They have dozens, if not hundreds, of modules that people just wrote and put up for publication. So you want to get a free module? Boom, there you go. Hop into Dragon's Foot, all right? Knights and Knaves Ale House, that was a good blog as well. I wasn't there as often, but it was a good place to be to, dive into all the old school shit. A lot of, we all jumped around from blog to blog. Board to board, rather. I'm sorry. I keep calling these blogs. Board to board. We all jumped around from board to board and discussed things. And sometimes a discussion on one board would get dropped into the other board and, that sort of thing. It was like, hey, it was cross-board referencing, right? So you kind of needed to be on all of them to see what the current topics of the day were. But it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. They were the place, like I said, everybody was before blogging started, right? Another cool blog that's still going right now is called I don't know how you pronounce it. Acaeum, Acaeum. It's a blog forum that's still going today, and it's for collectors, right? So if you want to know, like, how do you know the difference between the first printing and the second printing of the little brown books? It's because of this thing on page 5 and this thing on page 4, and here's the exact value you're going to get anywhere for them. That's where you go. So if you're a collector, you want to dive into it, the history and the lore of things and where it came from and how and why. These guys know everything. That's where you go for that sort of thing, right? The last one that I'll talk about here, and I'll give you the links for, it's called the Piazza. All right, the Piazza is a board that's focused on settings, old school specifically, but even newer ones. I've seen there. I was actually surprised it's still going, all right? I mean, because I logged in just to see. Rob Connolly, I asked him for some of the newer blogs, and he told me about that one. I'm like, God, that's still around? He goes, yeah. So the Piazza is focused on old school settings, but even some new ones too. You're not talking crunch, right? You're not talking numbers and how to min-max your guy and what the latest drop from Wizards of the Coast is about, Rangers should be this. None of that crap. You're talking about settings. So from Greyhawk to Mystara to Forgotten Realms, that's what you're getting to get into there, okay? Plus, like I said, a bunch of the newer ones too. So check out the Piazza. That's still going on. That's still going strong. So we A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So there you go. 7. We got 7 message boards you guys could dive into. Actually 6. Like I said, don't get into EN World and RPGNet. They kind of suck. We'll start with EN World and Morris, the guy who runs it. There was I remember I talked shit about him back in the day on the blog. I talked a lot of shit back in the day on the blog. So I talked a lot of shit about Morris back in the day because he's an asshole to me, I thought, But one day I talked so much shit about him on my own personal blog, he banned me from N-World. That's how much he hated me. He's like, fuck you, Morris. Fuck you, man. Then he banned me from N-World because of that. So even some of his diehard fans are like, dude, that ain't right, man. You don't ban a guy from your fucking board for what he said about your blog. So anyway, that was kind of fun. I made fun of him a lot because, fuck him. So anyway, that's my little take on all the message boards, guys. All right, next thing we're going to hit is the blogs. That's truly where everybody was in like 08, 09, right? The boards were prior to that, but 08, 09 is where it really started taking off. That's where I started my blog, where all the guys started theirs, all right? All the big guys. So we're going to hit that next, all coming up at the blogs, and then moving up to Google Plus, all right, which isn't around anymore, sadly. Well, maybe it's good. It went to a toxic waste dump at the end. Anyway, blogs. All right, guys, so blogs. Now, this is a big one. Big because, personally, for me, that's where I got involved in the OSR, really. But it wasn't called that. We didn't have a freaking name for it, like I said. But it's where I started really getting into it. Excuse me. I started my blog in, like, 08, I believe it was. And a lot of us did. I think Tim Shorts, Gothridge Manor, Eric Tankar, we all started within like a month or two of each other. Everybody just jumped into the blog bandwagon. We pretty much all used Blogger. Some people used WordPress and some other weird-ass ones, but most everybody was on Blogger. The benefit of Blogger was that everybody pretty much on the right-hand side or left-hand side of their blog had what they call a blog roll. And the blog roll was a list of all the blogs that you also follow, because you could like follow a blog, right? And it showed all the ones you follow, and they were listed in order of most recent posts. So if you're reading my blog, you could see on the right that Eric just dropped the blog on Tankar's Tavern. That's where he got, by the way, the name of his channel and everything else here. It was the name of his blog. So you could see that Eric's Tankard Tavern blog, he just dropped a post on whatever. And so as you're reading the thing on mine, you could see what he posted on his. Just click the link there. And we all cross-referenced each other. So it was a little bit of an incestuous thing, but it really, really helped us because we were able to see what was going on at a glance everywhere. If you were on Blogger, it was fantastic because you saw everybody. There was a couple hundred of us, who were like the hardcore of it. I think, and it was a fun place because you could make comments on other people's blogs about whatever, and then you did your comment, and then sort of you read other people's comments, and then you would get some more ideas, and then maybe you would be inspired to do a blog post of your own on a topic and reply to so and so's thing. Here's what I think, as a more of an expansion of your comments, basically. And it was so cool because then somebody would do a comment on that blog post, and the whole thing grew. It was like a huge discussion forum, limited to a few hundred of us. Everybody who's in the OSR are still kicking today, started there, I think, for the most, or were participated in that. Nobody who really could claim to be an OSR guy from back in the day didn't have a blog, or at least post over on these boards, right? That was sort of the signature. If you had a blog, if you're on the boards, you contributed back in the day, yeah, you were part of the OSR, the founder members, whatever you want to call it, right? So my blog was called Wondrous Imaginings. I took it down a long time ago, just less bullshit. And a lot of people sadly did because they, I don't know, for whatever reason, they just didn't want that shit out there anymore, or didn't participate and didn't want to be bothered with messages of new, in your email of, new people posted a comment on the blog you wrote 12 years ago, right? It didn't happen anymore. So plus with the move to Google Plus, they sort of like died out a little bit. More on that later. But like I said, mine was Wondrous Imaginings. Now, in my list there, my links and all that, I gave you a bunch of different blogs, and I'll touch base on some of them and what they were all about. Now, Grognardia, we had our disagreements, me and him, but his was truly the biggest and best probably blog of the OSR. But you thought about him, different story, whatever. He's a nice enough guy, I guess. But yeah, you know. But anyway, he had a really good blog, deep insights. He took a professorial view of things. It was more an academic kind of a guy. You know, he I don't know if he was in real life, but he looked at it in that way. He did deep dives and dissected a lot of things. His brain works very differently than mine. So he was a good blog. He talked about a lot of things, and his blog sparked so many conversations. You know, it really was the inspiration for many of us to keep going and to expand our thoughts about certain things. Right. Another blog, Tenkar's Tavern, like I mentioned before, Eric still has his going, and his went from topics to his more of a news thing now. And if you want to know what's going on in the OSR in anywhere, in any aspect, shape, any way, shape, or form, go to tenkarstavern.com. It's no longer a blogspot thing. It's tenkarstavern.com, and check it out. Link is in there. Tim Shorts at Gothridge Manor, who I play with, and you'll see on our Friday night shows. His blog is there. He still posts to it sometimes. Rob Connolly, Bat in the Attic, again, another Friday night guy, is there. If you're watching our Shadow Dark game on Mondays, you're going to see a Rusty Battle Axe. That's Ken. He had a blog back in the day, which is the funny thing was that I didn't realize that Ken had I knew of Rusty Battle Axe, and I know Ken. I didn't know they were the same person until a few weeks ago. That's how weird it was, because you weren't seeing people. You were just typing, and people went by nicknames like me, Joe the Lawyer. I got the Joe the Lawyer name because back then I was listening to a lot of Howard Stern. Everybody on Howard Stern was, Sal the Stockbroker and, whatnot, right? So I just said, I got to make a name if I'm going to be out there, and I don't want to give my real name, blah, blah, blah. So I went Joe the Lawyer based on fucking Sal the Stockbroker. So that's where it came from. But, Rusty Battle Axe, we communicated, we talked, we discussed things, I'm sure. I don't remember every discussion, obviously, back then, 15 years ago, and now I know that was Ken. So there you go. All right. Now, Vance has a blog. He's still doing it. And now, Vance, son of a bitch, why do you write a blog name that I could understand and pronounce? It's spelled Leicester Ramble. Right? Leicesters, who the hell knows, man? But make a blog you can fucking pronounce on my YouTube show, dude. But the link is in there too. And believe it or not, I just found out that Mac Jackson has a blog. All right, so msjx.org. He has a blog out there. So who knew? Anyway, those are the guys who are like my buddies we still play with and are friends. They all have these blogs, right? But a couple of the bigger ones that were going back then that were really influential was one was the Alexandrian. He took a really good deep dive into a lot of mechanics, and he came up with the J. Quayne the Dungeon, which, I think kind of a douchey move. He later renamed more recently because he published a book, How to Dungeon Master and whatnot. He called it, I don't know, whatever. He changed the name from J. Quayne the Dungeon to something that more Zandriing the Dungeon based on his blog name. Come on, dude. Really? Anyway, Courtney Campbell got into blogging a little later than all of us, but he contributed a lot. I think he was the guy who coined the phrase the quantum ogre. Like the ogre is going to appear wherever you are when it's needed. That sort of a thing. So he had a hack and slash master. Now, a couple of the big ones here. Jeff's game blog, Jeff Rents. If you have in your game a carousing table, I believe, don't correct me if I'm wrong, anybody who's listening to this, Jeff Rents created the entire concept of a carousing table. If not, he made it popular. Everybody was carousing back in the day because of Jeff Rents. A lot of deep insights about the game. I played in a few of his games back in the day online. Really fun, really great DM. His style is more a little gonzo than I am, but fun, great DM, good time, good guy. All right, and now he who shall not be named, Zach Smith, D&D with porn stars. A lot of drama came about with him, but I gotta say, he did have and still does have a damn good blog. Talks about a lot of game-related stuff. He is a brilliant dude. Whatever else you think about him, brilliant dude, and you will learn a lot. A lot of insights if you read his blog, especially go back to the older posts. He was involved in everything after a certain point. You know what I mean? I think he started 09 or 10 maybe. But yeah, he was always there talking about a lot of stuff, and he drove a lot of the discussion too. He was like, there was a few people in the blog days who drove discussion. Grognardia, Jeff Rents, Zach Smith, and Raji. Those were the four big ones, right? They drove a lot of the discussion, I think. A couple other blogs. Matt Finch had a blog for Swords and Wizardry. Hill Canton's blog was a great one. Raji's blog, again, you saw these essays that I talked about before, they were all on Raji's blog, right? So they're still up there, LOTFP to Blogspot, right? And then Paladin and Citadel. So click on those. Now, the good thing, like I said about these blogs, is that once you click on one, any of them, right? the ones that are still up, and I believe all of these are still up. I clicked on them. They may not be updating, recently, but a lot of them still are, surprisingly. They're still going strong. And on the right-hand side, they still have the blog roll. So you could click on these other blogs in the blog roll and see what else people are talking about. Maybe make a blog of your own, participate. I think all you need is a Gmail address to do it, right? So yeah, that was pretty cool. So I promised you a little story about 2,000 coppers, if you heard that old story. Basically, James Malazewski of Grognardia, he was making a mega dungeon called Dwimmermount, right? And he put out a rough draft of it. And this is in the early days when I started playing D&D online with Eric Tankar. He was running it, and I was there. Greg Christopher was there. A few other people were playing that night, and we said, let's just run Dwimmermount for us run it as written. Don't modify it. Don't fuck with it. Don't do anything special. Just because every DM always takes something and messes with it and makes it their own, right? So let's just run it as written, so we could just see what the hell's going on. Let's play the game as written, so we could really give it give the tires a kick here and see how it runs. And so we did, and it sucked. I mean, it was I don't know, maybe because it was in unpolished form or whatever, but it was terrible. And I wrote a blog post. I remember the next day, hung over as shit. I got up, I had one eye open, and I had to walk the dog, and I had to take a leak. And I remember I sat down at the computer, and I just hammered out a blog post based on the game the night before. And it was about 2,000 coppers, because infamously there was a room full of rats, and you killed the rats, and they had exactly 2,000 coppers. No more, no less. Exactly 2,000 coppers. And I said, that just summarizes the whole spirit of the game and why it sucked ass. It didn't make any sense. At one point, Greg Christopher's guy just suicided himself he just charged mindlessly and brainlessly into like this pack of people, because it sucked so bad. He wanted to end it so badly that he just kamikazed himself into the bad guys. And that was pretty much how we ended the night. And the shit blew up. And I think, it hurt Malazewski's feelings. He went into depression. I think he had some shit going on in personal life, whatever. And he was dropped from the scene for a long time. So, that was the 2,000 coppers drama. But anyway, in case you hear about it later, that's what happened. From the horse's mouth or the jackass's mouth, one or the other. But anyway, he was a great contributor, and I'll take nothing away from him about what he did back in the days with the blogs, and he's still going. I think he's just recently, a couple of years ago, he started reopening his blog and started posting again. So you go check it out, guys. All right. So that's how it went with the blogs. They're still a great resource, and the cool thing is that on the right hand side of most blogs, we all did a history, like what posts we did in January of 2025 or January 2015 or whatever. They're all there. Click on January 2015 and you'll see the 5 posts that so and so did, and you can read them all. And the cool thing is that if you cross-reference other posts from other blogs of the same month and year, you will be able to see what everybody was talking about at the time, right? So click on 5 blogs, go to June of 2010, and see what people were talking about. Generally speaking, we're all talking about the same shit. So if you do that sort of thing, you'll be able to see in real time, really, like a time capsule of the development of a lot of the thought that went into the OSR and a lot of the games that you see today. So that was a bit about the blogs, all right? So that's their purpose, their foundation, what they did for us back in the day, all right? And then what happened after that was Google+. Everybody, Google owned the blogs. They owned Blogger, rather. And so they decided we're going to make our own social media platform to compete with Facebook, because Facebook was kicking their ass. I don't know, 2015, I'm not sure, later. But Facebook's kicking their ass, and they wanted their own Facebook, basically. So they came up with something called Google+. The Google+ lended itself really, really well to face-to-face gaming. You could list in your groups on Google+ who you wanted to follow and this and that, and then you could set up communities, and you could share your groups of who you follow, and you could just share the entire group, and then boom, I could follow everybody that Eric's following and Tim's following, and vice versa. And so it was really a cool thing. And so it was it was a bigger, broader group, because by then the OSR was pretty growing pretty big. But really the best thing about Google+ is you could just join you could basically set up something called a Hangout, a Google+ Hangout, and invite people to the Hangout, and you could just live chat with each other, right? All video conferencing, which is kind of neat. And I think the first person to do this was probably Zach Smith. And I remember Tavis Allison was one of the first guys. I think Zach says, hey, maybe we could run a game live using Google Hangouts, like fucking 2 a.m. or something. He decides to do a Google Hangout game, and I think he might have used Roll20 or some other thing, or maybe it's Theater of the Mind, but he ran a D&D game. And all of a sudden it was like a light bulb goes off in everybody's head. It's like, holy crap, I could play D&D with everybody I've been talking to for the last X amount of years, 5, 10 years, whatever, right? I could finally play D&D with them. And so, bam, Google Plus hit the map hard. It was awesome. We were having a great fucking time. We were playing D&D with everybody. I got to play in so many games on Google Plus with people I really admired, and I got to see so many different ways of DMing. I got to see so many ways of playing as a character. I was pretty rigid, you know what I mean? My interpretation. I got to basically learn how to, be more freewheeling and loose and whatnot, and not be so by the book. And especially we had something called flail snails back in the day. You do a Google search on that, but basically what it was if you had a character that you created, AD&D First Edition, my guy was named Sir the Fist of Uther, and you had a character, and you could take that character, just like in the old days of Gary's Dungeons and Dragons old days. You could take that character and run him in different people's games. Certain rules around it, you know what I mean? If you're in one game, you couldn't be in 2 games at the same time, whatever. But yeah. So if you're doing a 5-session dungeon delve in one guy's game, you couldn't be simultaneously in somebody else's game. So there was some rules about that, but the cool thing was that Sir the Fist got to adventure in dozens of different people's games, from gonzo to fantasy to sci-fi to everything. He ended up with a shotgun, a laser cannon. It was insane. It was fucking insane. We had so much fun though. We had so much fun just learning how to play something different. And I look at that as boot camp. It was like D&D fucking boot camp, because it was like going to a convention for a couple of years, right? You're playing at a convention for a couple of years straight. Every goddamn weekend you're at this convention and you're playing in other people's games, and you're playing with other people side by side. And next week you might be playing in their game. Now you're playing next to them as a player with your character, right? So it was a goddamn good time. It was a special time, really it was. Unfortunately, Google Plus devolved like all social media does into yelling and screaming at each other and blah, blah, blah. And the spirit was lost of the early days, and it became a sad place, and so that went away. Now, the sad part about Google Plus going away was that fucking Google just deleted it. So much development of the OSR was on Google Plus, because it was linked to the blogs, but a lot of discussion happened in the Google Plus messages. You'd post something on Google Plus, it would simultaneously be in your blog or vice versa. But your messages no longer happened on the blog as they happened in Google Plus. And so just like on a Facebook message, you post a comment to a Facebook thing, and you're only seeing it there. So imagine if somebody just closed down Facebook. All the conversations and all the discussions you've ever had are gone. They're just completely fucking gone. And that's what happened. Google Plus is gone, and there's years of OSR development and thought and play and games that went into that we'll never get back. You'll never see it again. It's a goddamn shame, honestly. But again, like I said, it kind of had to go because it was getting so toxic anyway. After that, people went different places. This is sort of like the the diaspora, the scattering, if you want to get into Dune, right, where everybody, the great scattering, the great disbursement of everybody out into the world. And people went various places. People went to, some people stayed on board, some people kept the blogs going, but it was never the same as it was. Some people went to Discord, went to YouTube, went to podcasts. The community grew into a certain point, and then it gave birth to itself. I don't know what you want to call it, right? And then it scattered. And right now, that's kind of why there's no organized OSR. I guess really is another Dune analogy. You can never contain, corral, or organize the OSR. Just like, that's like Leto did. He strained them so long until they had to give birth, and then they scattered out into the cosmos. That's what happened to the OSR. That's why people try to control it, contain it, define it. You never will. It's gone. It's scattered. It's a bunch of theories and thoughts that have later been seeded into various things, just like Dune, just like the scattering in Dune. So. Yeah, so that was it. That was the blogs and the Google Plus days. A little good overview there for you guys. So hope you enjoyed that. Next, we're going to get into the OSR games themselves, the retroclones and other games that were based on it. Okay? So enjoy. I'll see you in a sec. All right, guys, so now the actual OSR games, the games that make up the OSR, all right, they're many and varied. Now, remember that blog post I was telling you about the history of this? I think he did really the best breakdown I've ever seen about the different core groups of types of games that people make, that they put in the OSR umbrella. I'm going to read a little bit from this literally because he really summarized it nice. And I'll get into what each one of them is later. And he calls the first one the classic OSR. It's the first wave. They're the most compatibility. They keep to the core principles of old school gaming, mostly the retro clones for the most part, right? And then he calls the next category OSR adjacent. All right, and the OSR adjacent game, by the way, this is in part 5 of his review of historical look at the OSR. The OSR adjacent games have a lot of same principles, a bunch of them, and some compatibility with the old school games. But it's like, for example, it's like DCC RPG, right? It's a little bit gonzo, keeps a lot of the principles of the OSR, takes it more of a gonzo direction. Some compatibility, like back in the Flailsnails days, I could actually play a AD&D guy in a DCC game with some tinkering around the edges there to make it a little more, suited so he's not overpowered, or vice versa, right? So it had a lot of compatibility and same principles. And then the next one he called the new OSR, the NSR, I think he calls it, the New School Revolution. And it's, as he describes it, games are like, they feel like there's some valuable principles to be learned from old school D&D, or that some of the concept of the framework of old school dungeoneering is interesting, but that specific rules aren't needed. The old D&D rules aren't needed, and you can't really play D&D as per se with these games. I don't like these games. This is a game like, for example, Mork Bork, right? Not my kind of game. Dungeon World, something like that. Karn. A lot of people like Karn, C-A-I-R-N, Karn, whatever you call it. Those sorts of games. They're very different. They keep some of the principles, but they're not cross-compatible. You can't, a good DM could always, mess with something and make it cross-compatible to anything, but they're a little bit more difficult, right? It's a look and feel thing is different. The vibe is different. Some of the principles are there, though. And then the last category he calls commercial OSR. He says this, I like how he phrases this. This is the realm of the grifters and the lazy. When I say that this branch has no principles, I mean more than just gameplay. This is not a community or a coherent set of games, but simply a grouping I used to lump everyone who adds an OSR search tag on their shitty shovelware Drive-Thru RPG. They are products, often originally 5th edition in nature, that are or can be converted to old school D&D with some minimal effort, and so are advertised as OSR. They have absolutely nothing old school about them besides a D&D mechanical based in some kind of usually generic fantasy setting. You can see a few of these a month being reviewed on 10-Foot Pole, which is another blog I didn't link to because I don't like the guy that much. And the unifying theme is how much writers of these projects simply do not get it. Rather than rule sets, the commercial OSR is almost entirely rooted in modules. I agree. They have minimal treasure for proper gold for XP games, lots of set piece and often carefully balanced combat encounters a la 5th edition, oceans of read aloud text dictating player actions, and minimal player agency in general, but might be set in a dungeon or have orcs or something, and so the designer slaps the OSR tag on it in hopes of higher sales. So that's it. That's what they're talking about there for commercial OSR. I'm not going to talk about any of that crap because fuck them. All right, and this is just an OSR video, and again, fuck them. Right, so that's a good overview of the broadly speaking of the different types of games. But now for a bit of a deeper dive. You got to start with the retro clones because Matt Finch, like I said, the godfather of the OSR, he started the whole thing going. I think he's the first one, along with Gonnerman, who made Basic Fantasy RPG. Chris Gonnerman. I think Gonnerman might have published his game first, Basic Fantasy, BFRPG, before OSRIC. Matt Finch and Stuart Marshall worked on OSRIC. And what they had the idea was the same thing as Gonnerman, that they could use the 3rd edition open game license, the OGL, which was a lot of fame lately for this 5th edition OGL, right? The 3rd edition OGL was the basis of the entire retro clone movement. They decided, hey, you know what? There's a lot of shit in here that we could use for the OGL that if we could basically remake AD&D. And that way we could say, like for example, Swords and Wizardry or OSRIC, which later came to be. OSRIC stands for Old School Reference and Index Compendium or some shit like that. It's basically supposed to be an AD&D clone with just the rules so that you could, the goal was, I need a rule set out there that I could publish an adventure, a module for, but I can't advertise that it's AD&D compatible or something like that, but I want to publish this adventure. So let's make this OSRIC rule set just so I can say OSRIC compatible. Since it's OSRIC compatible, it'll be compatible broadly with any goddamn game from the old days, right? Any old school game. And so Matt Finch came, and what he decided to do, with being a lawyer, and I think it was an intellectual property lawyer, so he knew his shit, he decided we're going to publish this crap in England. And so Stuart Marshall lived in England. They got it together. They published it out there because it's harder to sue in England, right? And I think you have different rules in England. If you lose the lawsuit, you got to pay costs and expenses, all right? So he said, let's do it, and let's drop it out in England and see what happens. So balls ballsy move that paid off, because they may have gotten threatening letters of, cease and desist or whatever, but nothing came of it, and they ignored it, and boom, here we go. OSRIC is out there now, right? And so everybody's like holding their breath. Like, what's going to happen? I remember talking to people who were publishing for like Pathfinder and whatnot back then over on the N World, and we're talking about everybody's watching what happens with OSRIC. The entire gaming industry is watching what happens with OSRIC, because it was the biggest. It was bigger than BFRPG, really, and Matt Finch was behind it. So he was kind of well known, right? So people were really trying to see what happens, because this could really change the entire RPG scene, and it didn't. It did change it. It really, really did. OSRIC stayed, and so other people were like, shit, there's an AD&D clone. I'm going to make a clone of blah, 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 right? And so then you had other ones, right? So you had, before I get into the clones, I got to get into a couple special mentions here. First, Castles and Crusades. I like this game. I don't like their skill system, which is their siege engine, but I like the game. It's basically AD&D D20ified, all right? And they were around early. I think maybe even before OSRIC. They used the OGL as well. And so I think it was a fantastic game, and you guys should get it. Over COVID and later, I just keep buying everything they put out, because it's good quality stuff, and they deserve to be supported. And then there's another one called Hackmaster. I guess here's a weird thing that happened with Hackmaster. Kenzer and Company had some, I guess, cartoons or something that they hadn't published in Dragon magazine or something like that. And when Dragon went on CDs, because back in the days, you want to get all copies of Dragon magazines, you could buy this CD that are already scanned in, blah blah blah. Here you got the whole collection. I guess there was some kind of a lawsuit, from what I understand, because Kenzer was like, hey, we gave you the rights to publish that shit in the book, not in a CD. And so as a settlement, they got to publish a rule book and modules for, they called it Hackmaster. It was a mocking version, a satire version of AD&D. But, they would publish Against the Giants, but a satire version of it, right? So it was kind of fun and funny. And later they came out with Hackmaster Basic. It's Hackmaster Basic is kind of a funky system, weird initiative system, but worth checking out. But that was the Hackmaster thing. So honorable mention to Castles and Crusades and Hackmaster. They weren't technically retro clones in a sense that, what we're talking about here, but they were definitely good and important. So as far as retro clones go, we're going in order, I guess. Matt Finch has Swords and Wizardry Complete. That is a retro clone of the ODD books, the original D&D. There's Swords and Wizardry Core, and then there's Swords and Wizardry Complete. All right, and that is where he basically just said, I'm going to take OD&D plus the supplements, which I didn't get into. There were several supplements, I think Greyhawk, Black Mortis, and that, which added more rules. If you look at all the ODD books and all the supplements that came out for it, you see what was later AD&D. It was the foundation for AD&D. So Swords and Wizardry Complete, which he just had a new version come out, the best that I've ever seen, actually. Get the newest one over on his website, OSR Games. That is the core rules plus all the supplements. It's AD&D light, I guess I'd like to call it, right? So that is Swords and Wizardry Complete is your ODD clone. Labyrinth Lord was the first BX clone that came out. Everybody was playing that back in the day. Everybody played it. And they had the Advanced Companion, which had new stuff. It was a fun game, and I think there's a second edition out now, so I got the link in there for it, revised edition. All right. As far as the Homes edition, which came before BX, you have something called Blue Home. Good game, simple, straightforward. Homes Edition goes. You can't really. Homes Edition was straightforward enough as it was, right? So you can check that out. And OSRIC again for AD&D. I've linked that out already before. You can take a look at that. And then we have second edition. There's a second edition clone which I never knew about until I started running a second edition game a year and a half ago called For Gold and Glory. It's a good game. It's a retro clone of second edition. They took some liberties and made some choices about what they're going to include, and maybe translated some difficult things that had contradictions in there, but it's worthy, and it's good looking as a point of reference, right? If you can't understand what's the spell, how should it work, maybe check Golden Glory and get their interpretation of it, right? So those were the original retro clones, and they were pumping along for a few years. And then this maniac named James Raggi came along and said, you know what, I'm going to take this fucking retro clone base, this foundation. I think he did Labyrinth Lord as his base, and he says, I'm going to do something different with it. I'm going to break the mold. I'm going to make this weird, creepy, horror, crazy-ass RPG called Lamentations of the Flame Princess. Now, I think that was the name of his old metal. He was hugely into heavy metal, death metal, whatever. And I think that was the name of his metal blog. And I think the Flame Princess part comes from because he had a crush on some redheaded girl. So, I don't know. So that's, I think, maybe like Charlie Brown, right? He had a crush on a redheaded girl. Unlike Charlie Brown, Raji has a full fucking head of hair like me. More than me, actually. So, down to his back. So anyway, he came up with Lamentations of the Flame Princess, which was a very awesome and different take on the retroclone system. And people were like, Jesus, we're not limited to just retro clones. We're not just stuck playing these old games the way they were with the old rules, just, newly interpreted. Oh my God, let's just try this thing. So that's what he did. He basically, put it out there into the world. It was fucking fantastic. It was fucking fantastic. So he did that, and it opened up a whole new avenue for everybody to put out games. And all of a sudden, people were dropping, the retro clones. You could throw a rock and hit one. A retro clone, a subtle interpretation of, Microlight 74, blah blah blah. It was a subtle interpretation of the retro clones, the predominant ones. But Raji broke the mold with that shit. And so soon, there's a lot of new ones came to be. And this is where we're getting into, the ones I was talking about before, from the blog, the Simulacrum, where he was talking about they're not classic OSR. They're clones, but they also have some more genetic material in there. Like Crypts and Things has a focus on swords and sorcery. Lamentations, emphasis on horror and late Renaissance, early Enlightenment elements, and this and that, right? So that's what he's talking about there. So these are kind of fun, and they're still being developed today. Right now, I would break these games, because I can't call them retro clones anymore, because they're different interpretations of old school games, using most of the old school elements and just take it in a different direction, like Raji did, right? So you have, I think, two categories of these games. One, rules light, and one has more intensive rule sets, all right? So the big ones right now, all right? The big one, the big one, the game I'm playing in every Monday with Tim is called Shadow Dark. That is the biggest. That is the biggest game, I think, other than Old School Essentials. Old School Essentials is it used to be called BX Essentials. Now it's Old School Essentials. It basically is from Necrotic Gnome, and it's the best layout of the old BX games. For some reason, the Labyrinth Lord guy, he just stopped doing his shit with Labyrinth Lord, and BX Old School Essentials just took over, and he came up with the best layout I've ever seen, the one that everybody's copying, and I think Shadow Dark copied that as well. So kudos to Old School Essentials. You did a hell of a job. Shadow Dark is the one everybody's sort of like, playing now. It's the latest shiny, because honestly, it's a great game. It had a great writer who was really marketing this thing well, and her wife was an amazing business person, so they did everything the right way, and it happened to be dropped around the same time that everybody was pissed off at Wizards of the Coast for their 5e OGL debacle that happened, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years ago, whatever it was. So yeah, it dropped at the same time, and it like hit $1 million or more on their Kickstarter. It was fucking fantastic. Another one is Deathbringer, Professor Dungeon Master over there at Dungeon Craft, the YouTube channel. He has an abbreviated version. He's a cool fucking dude. I met with him, had a few beers with him multiple times, and he gave me a copy of his original one. He's working on a longer version, I believe. Knave, Ben Milton of Questing Beast put out Knave, and I think there's a Knave 2nd edition out. Again, all these links are in their description, guys. Black Hack is another one. 5 Torches Deep. Savage World's been around for a bit. I think it could definitely be classified as a rules light game, though. Blood and Treasure, that's another one written by the guy who created Nod. Nod was a zine. We'll get into zines in a little bit. Nod is a zine that was amazing. This guy had more creativity in his fucking left pinky than I do my whole body. He just keeps writing and writing and writing. It's amazing. There's one called Low Fantasy Gaming that borders between rules light and rules heavy. I'm not sure where to categorize it. Get it yourself and check it out. And then I mentioned Karn before. Karn, whatever you say it. Yeah, that's out there. I'm not sure if it's quite, but everybody's playing it, it seems like. I'm not sure if it's quite OSR or not. I don't know enough, but I'll include it just in case. You guys can check it out and see, right? And then my friend Eric Tankar came up when he does a lot of work with Frog God Games. He came up with something called Swords and Wizardry Light and Swords and Wizardry Continual Light. I think the light version was mainly made just to have a quick and easy convention game. You could, here's the rules. It's a 4-page long rule set. Here's the basic characters. Here's all you need to know. You don't need to know too much. You dive into it, and boom, you just get playing, right? And then Continual Light was an expansion of that. Again, all those links are on the link page. As for the more rule-intensive rule sets, you're looking at, first one is Joe Block, Greyhawk Ragnar. The guy knows more about Greyhawk than I'll ever know. He came up with something called Adventures Dark and Deep. ADD, you get it? And he just finished up the second edition, the Kickstarter. You can get on the Drive-Thru Games, and there's a link there to Drive-Thru RPG and get his games. His BRW Games is his name. He has a lot of modules, a lot of stuff that's set in Greyhawk, but the serial numbers, shaved off a little bit. Although I just heard that you can now publish on Drive-Thru for Greyhawk or something. I'm not sure. I got to dive into that and see what's going on, but I'm sure he's going to jump on it if he can. He also has a huge mega dungeon out there, Castle of the Mad Archmage, the biggest mega dungeon out that I've perhaps seen. You can check him out, and he just finished his second edition of Adventures Dark and Deep, but you could buy his older first edition stuff at his mega dungeon on the webpage. Another one is Jeff Talanian came up with Hyperborea. The original name of this thing was Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea. Now, while Joe Block's book is basically the second edition AD&D that Gary Gygax always talked about making, and Joe went back and scoured the entire fucking internet and everything Gary ever said about the second edition game that he was designing, and Joe took all those elements and said, I'm going to make that game, right? And he put it out there. And so he's got a whole lot of different classes and a lot more detail. And I think it's a fine game. It's a really, really good game. I have every book that he's ever published on my shelf right now. I'm looking at them right now. Now, what Jeff Talanian did was he decided, you know what? I'm going to go to Swords and Sorcery route. I'm going to Conan. I'm going to Fritz Leiber. I'm going to Michael Moorcock, Zelric stuff. I'm going to, a little bit of horror in there too. And he really just decided he's gonna take it in a different direction, more old school. So he created this game called first Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers Hyperborea. Now it's just called Hyperborea, and it's great. It's a great game. It's my opinion a true swords and sorcery version of second edition D&D, but it's his own because it's not only is it a rule set, is inherent in its creation. It has a setting, which is kind of cool. And what I'm going to do someday, actually, believe it or not, years from now, once I get it all done, I'm gonna do it the same way Jeff did. It's a fantastic thing, and he puts out good modules, and it's really good stuff. Another one, Ambition and Avarice by my friend Greg Christopher. He put out his own game. It's on his second edition now, and you can click on that link there. It's rules heavy, simple game, but it's easy to understand. But it's thick. It's a big book. It's basically, when I look at the rules heavy rule sets, basically if you held it in front of your chest and a guy shot you, you wouldn't die. I guess that's how I define them, right? So a big one that's popping now. It's, in fact, Greg is playing a lot of this. He's not even playing his own game as much as he's playing Adventurer, Conqueror, King. They just finished their Kickstarter for the second edition. I linked to the first one, the first edition there, so I'm waiting eagerly. I think I have the PDF for it, but I don't like to read my first read of a game system on PDF. I want to sit down with the book on the couch and just start diving into this thing, but hopefully it comes soon. Adventurer, Conqueror, King was one of the first, along with Lamentations of the Flame Princess, the first edition of it, was one of the first big ones to make it big out there. It took a different interpretation of it, of classes and races and all that, and how they developed, and it really did a good job. And as the name describes, you start out as an adventurer, then you become a conqueror, then you become a king. It's sort of like the Conan route through life, right? So he was like an adventurer, then he conquered lands, and then became a king. And so it starts out with dungeon crawls and kicking ass, and then you conquer a region, and then they have rules in there for how to rule the region you conquer. Like, that's the king part, right? There's rules for mass combat. Really, really fucking good. Alexander Macris wrote this. He also wrote a book called Arbiter of Worlds, which is take on how to DM, which I find is a fantastic book. It's going to be in my master list later, guys. And last but not least, in terms of the more intensive rule sets, Rob Connolly, a friend of mine, Majestic Fantasy RPG, picked that up. He has the basic rules out now, and he's working diligently on the complete rule set. Rob will get it done. He's a slow writer, but he gets his shit done. He also has some other things that he put out I'll talk about later, too, that one of them, which I edited. And it's one of the few books that I can honestly say that when I read it, I learned more how to be a better DM, and that's after 40 years of DMing. It was a good damn book. Honorable mention, again, goes to what we were talking about earlier, DCC. Where the hell does that fit in? It's not quite old school. It's not a retro clone. It's a little bit different, right? It's a little bit gonzo, keeps the old school principles, but Dungeon Crawl Classics RPG. Well worth checking out and investing in, guys. All right? So those are the rule sets, the original ones and the newer ones. And again, links are all on the link page. All right? Thank you very much. The next thing we're going to come up with is adventures modules. All right? We're going to talk about that in a second. All right, guys. So now we're going to get into the adventures. All right, what I probably been calling modules this entire fucking time. Sorry about that. But the adventures themselves. All right. There's basically a different take, a different depending on publisher, depending on time, stylistically. So we're going to get into all that, right? So first, getting into the old stuff, the original modules, the original adventures that were published. From what I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, but there were three main people publishing modules back then. The first, obviously, was TSR. All the classics, right? Against the Giants, Walter the Drow, Temple of Elemental Evil, Keep on the Borderlands. Them. Everybody played them. Everybody loved them for the most part. And we all learned from them. We cut our teeth on those modules, right? Another company that was making modules was Judges Guild. Now, Judges Guild, Bob Bledsoe, there's been some controversy lately. I'm not going to get into that shit here with his son, his grandson, whatever the hell it was. But back in the day, I guess they approached, and I heard this story, and I may be butchering it, but I remember hearing this story from somebody who was in the know at the time, very much in the know at the time, from his mouth. Basically, was the gist of Judges Guild went to TSR, Bledsoe, and said, hey, can we publish adventures for your game? And Gary was like, yeah, sure. Who the hell's going to buy those? So, who, I think his take was, who was going to let somebody else do their imagining for them? Who was going to let somebody else create for them? Who would ever do such a thing? And Gary said everybody was out there using his rules to create their own adventures and modules and things like that, right? So he's like, yeah, go ahead. You got a license. Do it up, right? And so they did. And Gary's like, oh, shit, they're selling a lot. I want a piece of that pie. And so he gave him shit. They had it basically, as the Judges Guild modules developed over time, they had to make themselves less and less looking like they were designed for the D&D game system. They had to create a whole different bunch of stats like agility and dexterity and coordination or whatever the hell it was, right? They had to make it a little bit differently, but everybody knew it was for D&D, and you could just essentially just shave the serial numbers off and you knew it was a D&D or a D&D adventure you could run. And a lot of them became pretty famous. Still known today, still made the list, I think, of the top modules of all time, even to this day, for many of us, right? So the third publisher out there was Mayfair Games. They put out some good stuff. They mostly put out a lot of supplements, a book about demons, a book about wizards, things like that, which are pretty good. I got a few of those on the shelf right now I've gone through, and they're good to look at even to this day. But they came out with some modules. I think the Clockwork Mage was one of them I ran my guys through. And another one was, I think, the Lich Lords. It was like a high-level adventure, 18th level, which was kind of cool because there weren't that many out there back then for 18th level. So it was a fun adventure to play. It was like Monty Hall at the end. I remember there was like the treasure hoard after you killed all 5 liches was like 1,000,000 copper pieces. That was that level of Monty Hall shit. By the way, Monty Hall is a term that we used for describe. There's a show back in the day called Let's Make a Deal. And, Monty Hall would give away a lot of cash and prizes. And so whenever a module or adventure had a ton of cash and prizes or a DM was overly generous, they called it a Monty Hall campaign or a Monty Hall adventure. So that's where that phrase comes from. Those were the main ones, though. Those were the main publishers of adventures back then. So these were written in different styles. Today, they were mostly written back then in the same style. They were, it's like the early days, once they got into the box text and all that stuff, that sort of became a standard for everybody. People use box text, people use long descriptions. There were 32 pages and they had a map in the back, or maybe the cover had the map written on it in blue. That's a weird thing too, because you look at it and say, why is this light blue and white for the map of the dungeon? It was because back then Xerox machines, if the light blue prevented you from scanning the map because of the color. The copy machine couldn't copy that or come out black or something. It couldn't pick it up. It didn't register. So that was Gary's way of having people not be able to pirate stuff. So he would basically put it in this color. They can't copy it and they can't do anything without the map. So we're good to go. Even if they copied and pirated with the copy machine, the adventure itself, they can't do shit without the map. So that's why they're that color. But it became a sort of a standard thing all through the 80s and 90s. the layout. A couple of them, like Ravenloft, use an isometric map. They were pretty much standard, though. And so some people today still use that style. The more rule-intensive games, interestingly enough, use that style with the text and the long modules, and it's not digest size. It's it's full 8.5 by 11. Predominantly among them, Joe Block and Jeff Talanian from Adventures Dark and Deep and Hyperborea, like I was talking about. They all use the big box text and all that stuff. So you want to get into that. Nowadays, the latest greatest craze, I think, the old school essentials and digest sized books and all that thing, and people were looking for a simpler layout. And so you're going to see a light layout with a lot of bullet points, really no real box text, if anything. Bullet points and abbreviations. It's almost like a PowerPoint of a module, of an adventure. And so I'm not a fan of that, maybe just because I'm used to the old shit or whatever, but I want more depth. I want more character. I used to always say, when people were having these raging debates back in the old days of the blogs, do you like box text or no box text? Because I guess Against the Giants, the famous TSR module, did not have box text. And I was like, I want box text, damn it, because I want to hear the author's voice. I want to, understand his approach to this. I want to know what he was thinking and how he wanted this presented. I didn't have to copy it word for word, but it would help inform how I played the game as a DM. It would help inform my style of playing it, right? My interpretation of what's in the room. You look at 5 different people looking at a room description contents, and 5 different people can come up with 5 different ways to interpret all that and present it to the group. And that's fine, dandy, you want to do it that way, and you still have the option to do it that way if there is box text. But if there's no box text, then everybody's winging it, right? And I kind of liked reading the box text because, honestly, as a DM, as a good old DM trick, what I would do is I'd read the box text to the players. And because you're not going to memorize the whole 32-page fucking module, you read the box text to the players, and as they're digesting it, trying to figure out what to do, you're reading the next couple paragraphs to see what the hell, the contents of the room are and the ins and outs and how to play it and this and that. So you're refamiliarizing yourself with it. And it's like, oh yeah, this is room 32 with the thing. I got to do this, that, or the other thing, right? So it really gives you the time as they're thinking about what you just read to them to deal with, right? So it takes a little bit of work off you. So that's the box text, the approach. But the newer approach, like I said, is more like PowerPoint, digest-sized books. I guess that's the best way to describe it. Shadow Dark does that. Old School Essentials does that. A lot of the zine writers, like I know Tim Shorts loves to write his zines and his adventures in that same style, which is fine. Whatever floats your boat, whatever the people are going to buy. But there's a market for both. I mean, I think that somewhere along the line, there's going to be somebody who merges both styles into one, and one style to rule them all, sort of thing. One thing I have to mention in this section is, I mentioned it briefly in the other section about J-Quazing the Dungeon, or now it's called Xandering the Dungeon. The Alexandrian blog, which I mentioned before, he really got a good kick and got famous for one. He was a good theoretical guy. He really got in, Justin Alexander, got into a lot of good stuff and really sparked a lot of conversations theoretically wise. Then he came up with this phrase, he analyzed dungeons, and he would analyze J-Quaz's dungeon, Janelle J-Quaz's dungeon, trans person now, Janelle, so I'm sorry about that, interpreted J-Quaz's dungeon and said, this is the optimal dungeon design. This is fantastic. I think it was Caverns of Thracia, and it basically said, this is how every dungeon should be, all right? Every single dungeon should have these sort of elements to make it really great, because this is a fantastic dungeon. And they got into things like nonlinear, layout, multiple entrances and exits. I have the link there for you to figure it out, what they're talking about. It's like 5 different chapters of it. It's a fantastic analysis that we all did a deep dive in back in the day. All right, so really worth it, really worth checking out and understanding. So I figured now I'll get into talking modules. Of course, no video is complete without giving you the list of the best modules, right? And this is in no particular order. And some of these I'm going to group together as one thing, even though they're multiple modules, because they're just really awesome. They're just, in my opinion, I've played most of these, and I've read every one of them, and I agree that they are the best out there. And there's more of them. They're on the list. I mean, TSR actually, or Dragon Magazine actually put out a top 30 modules of all time at some point. And I have a link to that as well. You can take a look and see. But number one has got to be Keep on the Borderlands. Not because it's the number one, just because it was the first really, really good module that, like I said, millions of people played. Millions and millions of people played this thing. And it was the intro module to the red box, the BX red box, the basic set. So you can get into this thing, you can understand, you could play it, and there was DM advice at the beginning, and everybody cut their teeth up there, killing orcs and goblins in those caves up there, in the caves of chaos. And so, to me, that's got to make everybody's list. All right. The next one is a series of modules. Gygax came up with a bunch of different modules: the Dro series, the Giant series, the Slave Lord series. Ironic because, like I said before, we don't mention slavery, but here we got slave lords, right? So yeah, but then he really capped it off, I think, with the lower level module called the Temple of Elemental Evil. To me, I've run or played in that so many times I can't keep track. Different versions or interpretations, or use it as a skin and then fill in different elements to it and different purposes. I mean, my brother's running a game right now, 5th edition. He took the OG module and he's running a game with us for Temple, but he's changed everything around and made it his own. So it's fun. And then there was a series. I think he went from the Temple to the Slave Lords to the Giants to the Dro. And it all culminated in a high-level fight with Loth herself, I think. So got to do that. And here's the link. I linked you to the Wizards of the Coast page on drive-thru to check that out. The next one, next two really, both by Janelle Jaques, Dark Tower and Caverns of Thracia. You can definitely get Dark Tower out there right now from Goodman Games. By the way, Goodman Games, your goddamn website sucks ass, guys. It's terrible. I can't find shit. I was trying to get all these links for this video yesterday. I spent so many hours, like 10 hours prepping this thing, and I'm like, goddamn, your website sucks balls. Anyway, there's a link there for Dark Tower, all right? Now, Caverns of Thracia, you can get the older edition various places, but they just finished their Kickstarter. Now, Goodman Games are doing something kind of cool. I'll get into a little bit more later. They are Old Adventures Reincarnate or something like that is their series, OAR, something like that. But they come out with all these old adventures, and they're putting putting it out there for 5th edition, as well as publishing the original editions of them, all of them. And they're putting like essays and notes about it, and everybody like Malazewski from Grognardi will write an essay about how it affected his life and this and that, and how he ran it and how it's so great and blah blah. Fantastic books. If you get those, I think they're up to number 7. They just kickstarted 8 and 9. So definitely want to get those if you can. They're just for the essays alone, all right? And again, that makes my master list later on. And then lastly, I'm going to throw in Isle of Dread. It may not be the greatest adventure ever, but it's the adventure we played, my brother and I and my sister, we could get her to play. We had a great goddamn time with this thing. It's a hex crawl on an island, King Kong, that sort of thing, right? And, get the stuff, you're surviving. It's just a fun adventure. It may not be the greatest in terms of all the elements that make an adventure great, but nostalgia speaking, it was fun for us, right? So now let me tell you one thing. I did tell you the Dragon Magazine's top 30. You can take a look at that in the link, but I'll tell you what the worst goddamn module ever written was that I've ever run, the Forest Oracle. Now, I linked to a video. Tim and I did a video dissecting why it sucked balls so bad, and also we tried to fix it, what we would do to fix this thing. So it was an interesting take because Tim and I approach things very differently. I'm top down. He's like bottom up, nitty gritty, talking about the nitty gritty, and I got to look from the top down. So our discussion of it was pretty interesting. We did a whole YouTube live video about it, so that's in there as well. Now, that's, again, best old stuff, best old modules. I now have a list for you, top 5 new ones. All right, top of the order, got to be Death Frost Doom by James Raggi. He wrote the original one, and then he had Zach Smith do a new version of it. He threw his special Zachness onto there and made it awesome, even better. I just ran my 2nd edition group through that. That dropped it in there as a sort of a thing out there on their way on their travels, and it was awesome. It ran well for any edition, any old school, any retro clone. You can make this fit for anything. Basically, it's cool, it's fun, it's scary, and at the end you have a zombie apocalypse on if you fuck it up. So it's always fun. So another one was Too Many Iron God by it was a seminal adventure module written by Matt Finch back in the day. It was sort of like, this is a model of every old school adventure, every original TSR adventure done right. All right, it's a fantastic one. In fact, I just ran it because he got a Kickstarter completed. It came with as a bonus the new version of it. I just ran it recently at ShireCon and had a good time. I had to change it up a little bit, make it my own because it was a little bit too long for a con game, but it was fun as hell. Another one, Hole in the Oak. That is from Necrotic Gnome. It's the guys who make Old School Essentials. It came with one of the Kickstarters. I read through it. I haven't played it yet. I want to. It's a fun game. A little gonzo-y, maybe too much gonzo for me, for my take. But it's a fun looking thing. It's definitely a good one shot, right? It definitely is a good representation of new school layout principles, digest size bullet points, the PowerPointing of modules, right? Now, something exactly the opposite of that, Jeff Talanian's Hyperborea modules. Get all of them. Get every one of them that you possibly can. All of them are great. They're all multiple, long, detailed descriptions. They really immerse you in it. They're not one shots. They're not, one session modules. They're going to take you a while, 5-10 sessions sometimes, and they're very immersive. And he's using these to flesh out his world as well, his world of Hyperborea. So they're kind of cool. You watch as the modules grow and develop. He has callbacks to other modules. He's fleshing out the world. It's really a fun thing. And lastly, there's the weirdest fucking name I've ever seen for a module. Anomalous Subsurface Environment 1 and 2. It's like Expedition to the Barrier Peaks. You got some gonzo, you got some space stuff, you got some dinosaurs, you're underground, center of the earth kind of shit. Fun module. From what I could find though, you can only get that on Lulu. I don't know where else you could find it other than Lulu. But Lulu was a weird site because we used to all, back in the day, publish. Before Drive-Thru did print on demand, Lulu was the place to go to get print-on-demand books. That was the only place. It was the only game in town to get print-on-demand books. So if you wanted a module out there, you didn't want to just sell the PDF, you wanted to print-on-demand it, boom, you did Lulu. Drive-Thru got into the print-on-demand business around the time Kickstarters started kicking in. And so then everybody just linked it over there. And I think the OSR section of Lulu is kind of dead now, I guess, right? So no conversation about dungeons and old school D&D or even the modern OSR is complete without a discussion of mega dungeons and what makes them great. All right, now the original mega dungeon, I guess most people, the original two, were Temple of Elemental Evil. Some people argue, is it a mega dungeon? Maybe, maybe not. It's big enough, has multiple levels, a lot of shit. Maybe it doesn't hit the level of Mega Dungeonness now, but I think it's fantastic as an early example of what Mega Dungeons later developed into. That's set in Greyhawk. Another one, what is set in Forgotten Realms, is called Undermountain. Now, there's two versions. There was an older version just called The Ruins of Undermountain for 2nd edition. I hated it. It had maps that didn't make any sense. Maps that made, they didn't go anywhere. It was like some crazy kid just sort of like drew lines up, left, right, down, up. It was just, why? It's for me, dungeon design needs to make sense. It needs to make at least some architectural sense. What are the orcs take a shit, right? I mean, there has to be some logic or reason to why somebody would devote that much time and resources into it. Some people argue, well, Mythical Underworld just is because, and that harkens back to Gary's days. But I think we've evolved since then. And a newer version of that came out recently with Wizards of the Coast, and it's one of the few things they put out that are actually pretty freaking good. It's called Dungeon of the Mad Mage, and it has multiple levels. It's a mega dungeon, but done right, and at least more right than the original one, and more right than Temple, right? So it's a damn good thing. Now, Gary himself was involved because everybody, of course, wanted to play in Gary's own mega dungeon. And so there was talks, I think, about Rob Kuntz, how to publish it. And Trollord eventually ended up working. Trollord Games, Castles and Crusades guys, ended up working with Gary Gygax. And they said, Gary, we got to get your thing out here. And I guess Gary didn't want to put his thing out there for some reason. I don't know why. I don't know the whole story behind it. But he got together with Trollord. And Trollord got together with, guess who? Jeff Talanian of now Hyperborea fame, to make Castle Zagig. All right. And so basically Zagig is Gary's version of, a new version of his old dungeon. All the principles, he worked closely with Jeff. They got a lot of work done, and it was designed with Yigsburg, which is the clone of Greyhawk in mind, and there's a lot of work done with Yigsburg too. And actually, they're just republishing a lot of that stuff. They got the rights again from the estate, so they're publishing that as well. So that's kind of cool. So Castle Zagig made the first upper works, and I think the first dungeon level, the basement or the cellar, and then it stopped because Gary died and there was a dispute with Gail Gygax, his wife, and yada yada, and it all went to shit, which is one of the biggest disappointments in terms of I've been waiting eagerly for this my entire life, and I'll never get it kind of things, right? It was Gary's goddamn dungeon, or at least his current day interpretation of it. Now there's word that it might be, more levels made. I know that Jeff's not doing it. He got his own thing going on. But Castles and Crusades, the people, the Troll Lords, they're still doing it on some level, right? So I'm hoping we get that someday. Now, Barrow Maze. There was a couple old school mega dungeons that made it big on the scene, right? Stonehell was one that you could get on Lulu right now. I didn't like it that much. It was too old school in a sense, didn't make a lot of sense, and didn't have a lot of good room descriptions. Barrow Maze changed the game on that level. Greg Gillespie, and he's had multiple mega dungeons since then, different focuses. I think the latest is Dwero something or another. It's about a dwarven mines and all that stuff, but his big one was Barrow Maze, and it's really, really good. I mean, some people say, it gets a little old, and it's all crypts and this and that, and yeah, it could, but you don't have to always complete every mega dungeon. You could just go in, take a dive, raid a few things and get out. It becomes a living, breathing thing. More groups get in there. You might want to get in later levels and the whole bit. So it's a fun one, and it has all the newest design principles applied to an old school style dungeon that you could possibly ask for. All right. Now, I mentioned before Joe Block from BRW Games. He came up with Castle of the Mad Archmage, and that is truly in the old style of Gary's mega dungeon. All right. It's crazy maps and mazes and rooms with this, that, and the other thing in it, and has his own ecology going. It's if you want something like Gary did play back in the 70s, get Castle of the Mad Archmage. He just finished a Kickstarter. Not sure if you could buy it yet. The newest, latest, greatest one. I'm sure it'll be up soon. I have actually. Did I get it? I'm not sure. That's one thing. I get all these fucking Kickstarters, and I got. Did I get the thing yet? Did I check? I got to check the box and make sure I got it. I'm sure it's coming. If I didn't get it, I'm sure it's coming. I got to check though. I did get it. Damn it! I remember. I did a review. Yeah, I got it. All right. So, the next and the greatest one that I'm actually using right now in my campaign, I think the biggest mega dungeon that's awesome in every regard, was a mega dungeon that was being designed for the last 30 or 40 years. And it was put out by OSR Games. It's called Appendix. It's a massive, massive mega dungeon. It's the scope of this thing. You could play in this thing for the next 30 years. Let me put it that way, right? The link in here is to get the book itself. It's the biggest, latest, greatest version of it. And then there's another. I don't have the link there, but you could just hit their website. There's a package of maps you could get, one for the players on one side and the DM on the other, and you get the PDF version. So if you want to drop that right into like Roll20 or some other or VTT, you can. All right, so you got to get, make sure if you're getting Rappanathic, fantastic. I love it. For me, it's the best one of all these, other than Zagig, which, damn it, didn't fulfill its own potential. But the other than Zagig, I think Rappanathic is great. Now, one little thing about Zagig and Castle of the Mad Archmage is that Joe Block, coincidentally, every layer of the first level connects to, if you want to run Zagig, right? So there's a stairwell going from room X of the cellar of Zagig that goes down, and that maps absolutely, coincidentally, correctly with Castle of the Mad Archmage. So if you want to start with Zagig and then drop right into Castle of the Mad Archmage, you could absolutely do that without a problem. So it's a fun time. All right, guys? So that is my spiel about all the adventures and modules out there, right? So the next thing we're going to talk about coming up soon is all the settings, all the old school settings. All right, and also some of the new ones. All right, so we'll talk about that. All right, guys, so and here we go with the next section about settings. A good overview of all the major old school settings and some of the new ones, too. They're sort of designed along the same way, keeping general principles, but yeah, definitely could adventure any old school game in the new school settings I'm going to be talking about. So we have to start first off with, of course, Greyhawk. This is where Gary set his adventures in. The city of Greyhawk was the big one. It was like the Waterdeep of the Forgotten Realms, and that's the big one. Everybody played in it back then. We all had the map. That Darlene map was famous. It was the best, most well done map. The paper was printed on was awesome. It just felt different than anything you've ever felt before. It was cool. Darlene herself is still here with us, and I met her about a year and a half ago at North Texas RPG. I got 3 pictures I'm looking at right now above my head on the wall in front of me that she autographed for me. I bought them. I put them in frames, and she's a cool lady. I remember we were both walking into, there was this late night, midnight, don't talk about what you see here, get together one of the nights, and I remember both walking in. I remember I did the old chivalrous may I escort you in, my lady, kind of a thing. Put my arm out. She hooked in, laughed, giggled, and we walked in, sat there, and just watched the show. Fun time, awesome lady, great person. Yeah, can't say enough about her, about that, especially that map. It set the model for all maps, really, that people started doing, because it was the first world map that we ever saw, right? Now, Gygax wrote a stripped-down version of his setting. It didn't have all the stuff that any new settings have with like ridiculous amounts of detail. It gave you enough to start you off with, and you had to fill in the blanks. It first came out as like a folder, and you had the map and the book in there. And then later he expanded it to the Greyhawk box set. I actually didn't know until a few years ago that there was even until I got into the OSR, that there was even a folio version of it. And then I got a copy for it myself, and it's basically the same thing, more detail in the box set though, right? So now you're going to hear about the old Gary Gygax Greyhawk, and then we got the new Greyhawk, because Wizards TSR, I think it was TSR then, yeah, decided they're going to update Greyhawk and make it their own and get Gary the hell out of here, because I hated Gary at a certain point. So they got Carl Sargent. Now, Carl Sargent has been doing a lot of things out there in the RPG industry. He was a shrink, I think, from England, some kind of paranormal researcher too, I think. I don't know. Maybe it lends itself to RPG design. Who the hell knows, right? But his approach to creating settings and how things operate, very realistic, very realpolitik, if you want to get into Kissinger style of things. It made sense to me. There was cause and effect, and things hung together. And so there was the big war in Greyhawk, and then he wrote the setting book that came after the war, which kind of reset the world, right? And it was called After the Ashes. Or From the Ashes, I'm sorry. I keep calling it After the Ashes for so many years, but it's From the Ashes. The link is in there. And it was fantastically done. There was an atlas that was put out for it afterwards as well. And that's right, an encyclopedia as well, an atlas as well, encyclopedia basically. And he actually wrote a couple of supplements. One was the Marklands. Another was Iaz, the Evil, I-U-Z. I always call it Iaz. I guess it's I-Use. Who the hell knew? I-U-Z. But I call it Iaz, but I-Use, the Evil. Then he wrote one called an adventure called City of Skulls, where you got to sneak into I-Use's capital city and rescue somebody who's being held prisoner in there. And the person you rescue actually was a knight or whatever, and he was broken and battered. They tortured him to death, and his brain was scrambled, but they wanted you to rescue him anyway. They didn't know that, I don't think, but just as a figurehead to rally the troops. So they were going to marshal out this guy who you rescued in order to rally the troops, because the battle continued. There was it was like the Maginot Line or whatever, and you had to get rally the troops and get their morale up. So that was the whole premise of the adventure. Fantastic adventure, fantastic supplements. So if you're going to get anything, if you can only get one thing, honestly, I hate to be this, and a lot of people are going to hate me. The old school guys are going to hate me, but I'm going to say get all the Carl Sargent stuff. You don't need the Gygax stuff. You'll get enough out of the Carl Sargent stuff to understand what the Gygax stuff was. So, all right, I'm waiting for the arrows and slings to come hitting me now. Somebody's going to hire assassins to take me out for that one. All right, now the next setting, of course, has got to be Forgotten Realms. Now you're saying, well, this is old school. That was mostly second edition, blah, blah, blah. Mostly. The first edition of Forgotten Realms was in a gray box and had a really cool picture of a dude on a horse, evil-looking, savage-looking guy. I loved it. I can't tell you enough how much I loved it. In fact, when I ran a Forgotten Realms campaign in 5e, I took the AD&D first edition Forgotten Realms box set and the first couple supplements before they transitioned to second edition. There was a second edition setting, and a third, and a fourth, and a fifth, whatever. But I took the first edition stuff that they came out with, the Savage Frontier and the City of Waterdeep and all that stuff, and I used that as a springboard and did make everything else my own. Can't beat it, right? Now, a lot of people don't know, but the original basic set, was set in a world that was fully developed later with gazetteers. It was called Mystara, and they had a whole world. It was a world map, and I didn't know this actually, really, but it was crazy. It was crazy how little I knew about this until the OSR was really kicking, and I think Mr. Welch has a YouTube channel. You should check him out because he loves this setting. He's put out books on this setting. He dives into the setting. He's a Mystara guy. He loved it, and it's really a cool little setting. Now, I talked earlier about Tekkamel, the Empire, the Petal Throne. You can get that setting over at Noble Knight Games. There was a reprint recently, I believe. Well done. Judges Guild had their own setting called Wilderlands of High Fantasy. Now, Rob Connolly knows that shit better than anybody. He helped do the maps for it. He helped develop some of the books for it. And he's run me in his reskin version of it. And he's going to be putting out his own setting based a lot on the same principles and some of the, stuff in Wilderlands of High Fantasy. So keep an eye on that. Watch this space for what Rob puts out. Now, here's one I don't like, but I got to include it because it was there. Planescape, all right? Planescape was a setting for 2nd edition, a box set that came out. And I know I'm going to ruffle a lot of feathers here. There's a lot of Planescape fanboys and fangirls out there, but I couldn't stand the goddamn thing. They basically wanted to do a setting that was something to bring together all the planes, all planar travel, and how it all worked and this and that. Rather than just using Manual of the Planes for 1st edition, this was their attempt to say, to hell with Manual of the Planes. We're going to use that as a springboard and make an entire setting based on it. There's a city called Sigil, S-I-G-I-L, which, interestingly enough, I think is what they're calling their new VTT now at Wizards of the Coast. But, the City of Doors, and it's how you got around from various settings, and it was you could mingle with demons and devils and angels and saints, whatever it was there. And there was a weird way of talking, like based on his old English accents. It's just so stupid. Anyway, enjoy Planescape if you want, but I hated it. Another one that TSR put out back in the day was Lankmar. Fritz Leiber licensed Lankmar to Gary. Gary was a huge fan. Fritz Leiber was a special guest at many early conventions for TSR, all the Gen Cons. And he was one of those honored guests, and Gary loved him, and they talked a lot and this and that. And Fritz Leiber licensed, that you can make modules and adventures and develop out the setting based on all my books. Fritz didn't really have a lot developed. He made it up as he went along, whatever he needed to do. So people at TSR had to get together, read all the books, and figure out, oh, he mentions this here, it must be there. Then they used that as a springboard and made it their own. Now, there was a 1st edition Lankmar book and a 2nd edition. They were very, very similar. The only difference is that the 2nd edition book, number 1, was better, but it included more material because I think at the time they put out the 1st edition book for 1st edition D&D, Fritz Leiber hadn't finished writing all the Lankmar stories. He later did. And so they put out a 2nd edition of the Lankmar setting book, which I linked to, and that has all the information from the later stories as well. Well worth it. They introduced, first time I ever saw at least, something called Dungeon Geomorphs. It may not be the first time it was invented, but used, but I think that's the first time I ever saw it. Because you didn't want to you didn't want to detail the city-state invincible overlord and have it a label and a description of every single building in an entire massive city. So they did Geomorphs for it, which is kind of fun to see. I used those. They were pretty decent too. But check that book out. Now, Mongoose later had a Lankmar line, and it sucked. But what you have now, though, is Goodman Games is putting out a Lankmar line. They're doing a deep dive into this and looking at all his notes and everything he ever wrote down about it. Somebody hit the archives. He spent a lot of time at a university archives reading all this stuff. And did, I think, perhaps the best version of Lankmar that I've ever seen, though it doesn't tick the nostalgia button like the other one did. A little side note about Lankmar, I guess TSR, well, the royalties from TSR for Lankmar kept Fritz Leiber going in his later years. He didn't have to grind. He had a drinking problem, famously. I don't know if he was drinking still, but he didn't have to grind out. He wasn't living in abject poverty anymore. He had more of a fun lifestyle. He could travel, do some things, and he got some respect, And people all of a sudden knew who he was again, because he's one of the the luminaries, rather, of the golden age of science fiction fantasy writing back then. In fact, Fritz Leiber, I think, is the one who coined the term sword and sorcery. He made it up. He was the first guy. So, so that's Leiber. Anyway, check out those. I still look at Lankmar as a good model of a thief. If you want to do a thief's adventure or a city based around thieves, that's the one to do. And definitely read his books, too. I don't know who's getting the royalties anymore from those. I don't know. Maybe his son. I remember back in about 20 years ago, I found that his son was a university professor, and I sent him an email. I said, I just want to thank you for everything, your father did. Just respect for your father, man. He really influenced a lot of things in my life, and I appreciated it. And he wrote back real nice, and thank you, and this and that. But all right, now, Dragonlance. I talked about it a while ago in different contexts as the development of the adventures, and have influenced the development of 2nd edition game and all that. But there's a whole Dragonlance category over on DriveThru. You could pick up all I think the modules have been combined into all first four modules in one book sort of thing. I don't own those. I just own the original modules. So take it with a grain of salt. I haven't read them. That's what's out there though. All right, and I know that I spoke of MERPS and Rollmaster, but Middle Earth is a great setting. And Rollmaster from the MERPS setting, based on a Rollmaster system, was my take, the best interpretation of it. There's a lot of new, Middle Earth crap out now, 5th edition and others. But for my money, MERPS, go with that. They had the best modules, the best setting books that you possibly get out there for it. Now, one other setting TSR put out was called Dark Sun. It was a psionic-based post-apocalyptic sort of a setting. Is it D&D? Is it old school? Like I said, I wasn't going to get into Boot Hill and sci-fi and shit. I don't know. But I think just for the psionics alone, it's worth it. In fact, as I make my own little psionic system for my game, I'm going to, use some of that as inspiration and ideas, because they really... But the one thing the Dark Sun did is develop out the psionic system more than any other system did ever, for 2nd edition. The 2nd edition, by the way, guys, psionic system is the best psionic system out there. Every other one has been a pale imitation of that. Most other psionic systems are based around a spell system, and they're just calling it psionics, and you're giving it PowerPoints and spell slots. That's all it really is. They suck. A true psionic system has psionics operating very differently than spells and doing different things than spells do, and that's what the 2nd edition psionics did. So you get the Dark Sun books, you get the original psionics handbook for AD&D 2nd edition, and you're good to go there. All right. Another one I'm going to mention is Hyperborea. I know that's an RPG, and I told you they were developing through modules and otherwise. Jeff is working hard on a city now. I talked to him at ShireCon about a month or so ago. He's working hard on developing a capital city of his world, and he's really working on the world too. So it's good. If you get his modules, you will see the development of his world, and I can't wait till he does his Kickstarter for the capital city of the world. I'm looking forward to that. Now, some of the newer ones out there that are well worth looking into. Midderlands. I am not a fan of the style of it. It's from Monkey Blood Design. Glenn Seal. Fantastic maps. Way interesting take on a lot of things for settings. Well developed and well done. Not my style, but I know a lot of you would like it. So I'm not going to diss it because it's awesome, and Glenn Seal's a cool fucking dude. So get Midderlands, check it out. Another one is Dolmenwood. All right, the guys who bring you old school essentials, now they're making a setting for it over at Necrotic Gnome. So Gavin, all right, Gavin, definitely get Dolmenwood. That's Gavin's setting. And last but certainly not least, it's a mini setting. It's called Black Marsh. It is Rob Connolly's setting. It's free. Here's the best thing. It's free. Get it on Drive-Thru-RPG. I think it's the #1 gold best-selling setting on the entire goddamn site, if I remember right. So the link is there. Pick up Black Marsh. It's a city and the land surrounding it, which will later be incorporated wholesale right into Rob's setting that he publishes someday. It's coming eventually. Someday it's going to come. So get Black Marsh, and you'll have a great setting to start off your guys with. In fact, Eric Tenkar ran us through some stuff in Black Marsh back in the day. I didn't even know it was Rob's stuff. I had no idea until later. I'm like, oh, that was you? I knew of a Viz before. I didn't know what it was, but yeah, I had no idea it was Rob's thing. So it was really fun. It's a great setting. I had a great time in it. There's a lot of detail there. Rob and I think alike. In fact, if you get his book, you look on his site there, you can click on it on Drive-Thru. When you look at Black Marsh, click on his publishing site, and you'll see how to make a fantasy sandbox. I edited that book. A lot of the principles behind that go into the Black Marsh setting. So if you're going to get one, get the other. Black Marsh is free. Buy the other one. Give Rob some money, and it'll be a good time. All right. So that is my overview of all of the settings, guys. And it's fantastic. Now keep in mind the Piazza I mentioned before is a board that's still going strong. They're talking about all these settings and more. So hop into the Piazza, okay? And the link is in the links again above under when I talk about boards. All right. So next we're going to tackle zines or zines as Eric calls them wrongly, just because it's I don't know why he calls them zines, but they're zines, Z-I-N-E-S. All right. We're going to tackle that in a second. All right, guys, so zines. What the hell is a zine? It's a shorthand version of magazine, I guess. It goes back to an old, it's self-publishing, do-it-yourself, DIY. So do you want to make an underground magazine and do it yourself? This is what they were called, zines. A lot of people did it in the metal scene and whatever. I mean, a lot of different scenes back in the day. It's pamphlets. You know what I mean? Back in the day, what you did is you got your typewriter out. You maybe took some, you grabbed some pictures from various things. You stole out of magazines or whatever. You taped them in. You photocopied that shit at your mother's workplace or whatever, at your own workplace, and then you would basically fold the paper in half, put a staple in the middle or two, and you had your own magazine. It was very very sort of I don't know, renegade. You know what I mean? It was sort of like a revolt. It was like, fuck you and your glossy ass bullshit. I'm gonna do it my way. I'm gonna get my own damn message out there. I'm gonna do it in the way I want to do it, and I don't need to spend all that money. And neither do people. I'm gonna put out whatever I want to put out, and I'm gonna pass it around for free. And that's what happened. A lot of people just pass that shit around for free. They trade it, you know. And so you go to a show, metal show, Grateful Dead, or whatever. People passing around zines, talking about whatever they want to talk about. It's like having a web page or a blog back in the day, except you had to do the printing, pasting, stapling, copying, all that yourself, you know. So that's sort of the origin of it. Tim Schwartz and I did a long video a while back, months ago, about zines and what they are and styles today. So I've linked that in there. But just at bottom line, there's long story short on that, and it's worth listening to. But what you're going to see when you do is people talking about the various styles of zines nowadays, because with desktop publishing and all that. I mean, with Microsoft Publisher and all the other ones out there, you can basically create Time magazine quality zines. And so there's a huge debate in the zine scene, about, is this really a zine if you're not doing it yourself, and what level does it arise to if you don't? Is it so high production value and everything else that is it really a zine anymore? And Jesus Christ, you're charging $15, $20 for this thing. You're breaking the whole ethos of zines, that it should be all free, and passing it around. And I get that justifies, you need the price to justify the cost of the publication. But at what point do you just become a fucking magazine? Right? Even though it's solely published by one person, or maybe two or whatever, at what point is it just a fucking magazine? And so that's the debate. So we get into that a little bit in the styles of zines. Now, as the OSR scene kicked, right, in the 90s, about 2009, a lot of zines started popping up. Big one. I think the biggest one at the time was by Christian Walker. He came out with Leviatar and a couple other ones, but I've since went and picked up all the Leviatar zines. Christian is still with us. He just doesn't kick it around the old school anymore, but he's still an amazingly creative guy. And he just put out these zines, and he was of the old school ethos, he barely priced, just to cover his costs. And if you sent him something of yours, he'd send you something of his. He had that old school ethos going on there. He's a cool dude, surfer guy, musician, that has that whole vibe going on there, so he kept it going. He's kind of a hippie, a modern day hippie, Around the same time, Tim Schwartz of Gothridge Manor put out The Manor. And I've linked to his #1 issue in drive-through. You can pick up #1 there and get it printed out. Now, I have all the originals there, and as I famously said to him in one of these videos, Tim, I didn't read them all. I looked at him, skimmed them, like, yeah, that's good. He's like, you didn't read my shit? No, I didn't read it all, man. I don't read a lot of these. Sometimes I'll buy stuff to support people, just to support people. But I'll dabble a little bit, but I never read them fully. Just to take a look and see what's going on. James Radji put out something, Green Devil Face. He had a zine and a link to Noble Knight. That's pretty much the only place you could get it now, I believe. There was Knock was like more of a magazine than a zine, I think. Maybe Fight On, I think the same way as well. And they were good, the high production values and all that. A lot of people would write for these things. A lot of old schoolers who were doing blogs would then write for a zine and get published in a zine. All of a sudden, your story's in a zine. So it sort of went against the ethos of, this is my personal thing I'm putting out there in the world. It was more magazine level. But one guy who did his own, James Stater, he also made the RPG Blood and Treasure I was talking about before. He wrote the Nod zine, and I have the first 17 on PDF, I believe. At the time, you can only get them on Lulu. I think he's now putting them all out on drive-through. And so I have the link to the first one of Lulu, but check the newer ones on drive-through. All the newer ones are over there. But that guy, he just creates and writes and writes and writes and never stops fucking writing. I don't know how he does it. I can't figure it out. I mean, he must be on speed for the last 25 years. He's just writing nonstop. And they're all creative. They're all excellent. They all give you a lot of information. And I think he put it all into Blood and Treasure and all the other things that he's, used these zines as a basis for. Knock Spell was another one. Mythmere Games, Matt Finch put those out, and you can get Knoxspell magazine off of his, and one of the newer ones out there that's that you guys that are familiar with, Flint Fireforge. He's in my Monday night game that I'm a co-player with in Tim's Monday night game that he runs for us for Shadow Dark. He has a zine he's putting out there. He's publishing, most of them are right now are on Gumroad, which I never heard of until he was telling me about it. And it's called Crit Happens. Get it? Shit happens, crit happens. And it's it's on Gumroad, and I think he just put one on Drive-Thru too. You can pick it up there. So really good stuff. You can check out the old zines and get an idea what they were all about, what we were talking about. It was sort of an adjunct, sort of a publishing thing related to the blogs, but actually in print that's going to last forever. People wanted to put something out there like that's going to be around forever. Maybe it's in your hand, And this is early days again, before people were really publishing a lot of modules, adventures. So it was a fun time. It was a fun time. And so if you look at right now, how do you get into zines? Honestly, the best place to do it. Tim Short started a Facebook group for RPG zines. Since it got so big and he had a lot of time on his hands, so he passed the ownership over to somebody else, and it's still running strong, like thousands of members. Link is in there for that. And not to be overlooked is Zine Quest. Kickstarter knows that there's a market for zines out there, and so I think once a year, maybe twice, they have something called Zine Quest, where you could actually, everybody who wants to publish a zine publishes it at the same time, and they link to Zine Quest's, I guess, overarching umbrella, and so everybody could look at whatever's new for Zine Quest this year and pick up some new zines. A lot of good zines to be found on there. You back some guys, and you'll get it, and it's really fun. It's a good time. It's a good time, guys. So that is the zine scene, all right, in a nutshell. Not too many going on right now and anymore, but the older ones are definitely worth diving into and seeing what they're all about, essentially. So pick those up when you can. And again, links are all in the link page, all right? Next, we're going to talk about conventions, all the old school conventions, all right? So talk to you in a second. Alrighty, guys, conventions. Game conventions, a staple of the RPG hobby since Gen Con and all the other ones back in the day. I think Gen Con started in a tiny little hall, and actually the first one was in Gary's basement or something around a sand table. But yeah, they moved to a big hall, and it's only grown from there. So just like all the, every convention has a specific focus, right? And you could tell what it's all about and who's going to be there. Now, there's a lot of conventions have a little bit of an old school element, the big ones, but they're not focused on the old school. Like Gen Con, it's sort of like the bucket list thing. You might want to go there once, but it's not what it used to be. It's not focused on old school D&D. It's all kinds of different shit there now. Cosplay, whatever the hell. So it's maybe on my bucket list to do once in my life, but if I have my choice, if I can only go to one con for the rest of my life, it's going to be an old school con. All right. And probably what it's going to be, the first con we'll talk about, North Texas RPG. And a close second to ShireCon. North Texas is the granddaddy of all the old school cons. It's down in Texas, near Dallas-Fort Worth. I went to it, not this past one, the one before, a year and a half ago. God, it was a good time. It's been on my bucket list forever to get there. In fact, one of the early ones, Eric Tenkauer and I were going to be going there. We're going to be sharing a room and having a good time. And I had to bail because I wasn't making that great money back then, and I had a car that constantly had fucking problems. I don't know how many times I changed the fucking transmission in that car. Piece of shit. Never got a Ford Taurus, by the way, guys. They suck. Anyway, I wanted to go. I couldn't go. And Eric ended up taking Rachel instead, his wife. And so they had a great time. She had a great time. She hasn't missed one since. This is over 10, 12 years ago or something. So it turned out to be a really good thing, I guess, that I didn't go, because now she goes and she enjoys the shit out of it. So North Texas, everybody who's anybody in the old school scene goes there, has been there, is a special guest there. You could sit down with a beer and rub shoulders with Jesus, anybody and everybody. Like I said before, Marsh came up and he says, "Hey, here's the companion book," and I'm just talking to Eric. Bam, there it is. I'm like, Jesus, what the hell, And just walking into a room and you see your heroes, the people who wrote modules and books that you loved. They're all right there, and and there's a good bar. So afterwards, you're having a drink with them, bullshitting, talking about everything they've done for you. You've done the fun you've had in their games, and they're getting to know the person as a real person, not just as this luminary of the OSR. It feels like, as Eric said, and I've only gone once, and I want to go again soon. But as Eric says, it feels like family. It feels like going home. He's been there at least 10 or 12 times, I think, and it's run by Bad Mike Battleato, and he and Eric do a show every Wednesday. talking crit. And so, yeah, you'd hop into that show every Wednesday and just watch them shoot the shit. They always have guests there, special guests, usually from people who were usually members who go to the con. So you find out what they're doing, what they're publishing lately. The one time I went, it's like one of these moments that you just, I'm in Texas. I wanted to go to a real Texas barbecue place. So I, took an Uber out there, and I'm sitting there, just finishing up my meal. He walks into this random-ass Texas barbecue place. James Raji and his lady friend and Courtney Campbell all walk in. I'm like, oh, shit, James, what's up, man? He was there. It was his first time. It was my first time. And we hadn't had time to talk, although I rated his table. I probably spent $300 or $400 on his table. He actually said that he made more money at North Texas than he did at Gen Con. So that says something about the audience that we're talking about here. So anyway, he walks in. We sit down. I was about to leave. I was like, oh, fuck, I'll grab another beer. Grab the beer. We just shot the shit for like 3 fucking hours. It was fantastic. It was a really fantastic time. I had fun. I had a good time there, and I hope to go back again. I'm trying to save up some money. I want to do my own things with publishing and whatnot, so I'm trying to get a little bankroll on that first before I head back again, but I'm definitely going to go again. Another one, again, close second to North Texas. It's one in my home state of Connecticut called ShireCon. Run by Tom Wilson. It's a fantastic convention. ShireCon, because it's set in a Shire-like setting of northwestern Connecticut, Litchfield area. Very beautiful area. Very, nice landscape. I mean, it looks like the Shire, and it's always set in the fall for Bilbo's birthday, right around Bilbo's birthday, of course. So he's had 6 of them so far. I've gone to almost all of them. I think I missed the COVID one, but yeah, great time. It's another one where it's such a family feeling vibe to it. It gets about 150 people there. ShireCon. I think North Texas gets about 500 people plus some walk-ins. Honest to God, ShireCon could be the North Texas of the Northeast if he did a different location, but I understand why he wants to keep it there. Like if he moved it to another town with a city with a hotel or something, he could really be the North Texas of the Northeast, but I get it. I get why he wants to keep it there because it would probably lose something. It would probably lose the pastoral settingness of it all, Another big one, GaryCon. GaryCon is, I've never been there. The rest of them, GaryCon, I've never been there. I've only been to another one of the rest, TotalCon. But GaryCon is fun, I guess, because it's run by Gary's family members, right? I think that's where it started. And so you go there, and again, a good place to hobnob and play a lot of games. It's a pretty big con. In fact, I remember I was watching Big Bang Theory, where a lot of you listening to this probably picked up on, D&D, let's try that or whatever, right? So I was watching Big Bang Theory, and Sheldon wanted to go to GaryCon. I'm like, oh, no shit. I know. It's like it made the real mass media, it made the big time when you're getting talked about on Big Bang Theory. So it was kind of cool, man. Gamehole Con, run by an attorney and a huge collector. You might have one of the biggest collections of D&D stuff ever in the entire history of the world. And it's a great con. It's a great convention from what I hear. Again, bucket list thing. I want to hit GaryCon and Gamehole Con before I die, right? Probably even before I gonna hit Gen Con, honestly. So check out Gamehole Con if you want to go. Well, again, all these links are on the link page, guys. And one that I actually have gone to up in Massachusetts, it's I think Marlborough, Massachusetts. It's called TotalCon. That's a cool little con. It's about 1,500 people, I think, last count. The last time I was there was 2 months before the beer bug hit, right? So I'm there with Eric, and that's where I got to meet for the first time Matt from Swords and Wizardry fame, Matt Finch. And it was so fun. A little tightly compressed in that little building, but still got a bar, hanging out with good people, talking, and having a good fucking time. First time I got to play in Jeff Talanian's Hyperborea game. It was kind of fun because this gives you an idea, like the old school community. Like we all kind of know each other and of each other, but maybe haven't met each other unless we played together somewhere. So I remember I was running late. Because I was probably at the bar. I'm trying to find the fucking room. Went to the wrong room. And I'm running into there, and there I see Jeff's table. I'm like, oh, cool. There's one seat left. That's my seat. I go to sit down, and a couple of guys are like, hey, Joe the lawyer. I'm like, who are you? Who are you? I didn't even know. I had any idea who they were, right? But they just knew that was, I'm coming in. So I'm the last guy there. I sat down, and I'm sitting there with some coffee because I, late night drinking or whatever. So I'm sitting there with a cup of coffee, and the guy next to me pulls out a flask. You want some? I'm like, these are my people. I found my home. This is fantastic. Pour some beverage into the flask, and we're good to go. So yeah, it was a good fucking time. Great people there. It's really, really awesome. So I definitely would recommend you guys going there. All right. So last one is a new con. I think it's the first one coming up. It's Central New York RPG Con. Nobody's been there because I think this is the very first one. Eric Tankar is going as a special guest. It's good chance that I'm going. It's in June, right after North Texas, a week or two after. It's in June. I'm going to go most likely. I think Rob Connolly's talking about going. Vance from our game might go there. Tim Shorts might go there. So it's only a few hours for each of us, right? So it's not like it's a bad drive. So it's sort of like a meeting in the middle sort of a thing. So I'm looking forward to getting all together with everybody. I'm definitely pretty much going to go. If you want to meet me in person, that's the next time to meet me. It'll be in June. All right. So that's pretty much the con review. Now, these are the cons that I know about. I know that there must be other cons out there, guys. All right. So please, if you know of a con, no matter how big or small, anywhere in the country or the world for that matter, because I know people are listening all over the damn world to this video. So, which is kind of weird if you think about it. I mean, I got people in fucking, Russia listening to my video, or people in Argentina. It's so strange that I can't get over that. That people know me in some other country that I don't know and I'll never meet probably. It's just a strange thing. But anyway, people all over the world are listening to this video. And so if you know of I would love for this thing to be a source of old school conventions, no matter where you live in the world. So if you know of any that focus on old school games, OSR stuff, please let me know. Send me the link and I will check it out and drop it in the link page. All right. So good to go. All right, so that's the overview of old school conventions, guys, and please look to find more because we all want to go to old school conventions and play with our buddies, or soon to be new buddies. All right, next one, the 10th chapter, I guess you could call it. This is the OSR resources everybody should have, not just things published for the OSR, but all the OSR resources everybody should have on their shelf, or at least in a PDF. All right, start that in a second. All right, guys. OSR resources everybody should have. This is going to be maybe a longer one than even the intro. I'm just looking at the list here. There's almost 40 things I'm going to go over. I'll go over them briefly, touch base on them, maybe a minute each, and describe what they are and what they're all about. All right, and this pretty much in no certain order except for the very first one, because I mentioned earlier. All right, this is something you got to have on your shelf, whether PDF or bookshelf or whatever it is. You got to have this book. Number one. AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide. Words of wisdom from the master himself, the Dungeon Master Gary Gygax. All right. The organization, it's kind of funny, but once you realize that it's organized exactly the same way, chapter for chapter, as the player's handbook, then you realize, okay, this is why it's organized. So chapter 1 relates to chapter 1 into PHB, right? So he gives you his ideas, his interpretation. It's basically he's shooting a shit with the typewriter about everything they ever wanted to shoot a shit with Gary about. All right. And so you're going to pick up a lot of information, a lot of wisdom. It's one of those books that you'll read, a paragraph or something 5 times. And then on the 6th time, oh my God, wait, that's something I never saw before. It's one of those kinds of books. That's why I call it the ultimate shit-terial book, the ultimate book to read while taking a shit. All right. So you're going to get forever. I could pull that book open now, spend 10 minutes reading it, and learn something from it that I never thought of, read, or understood before. So it's timeless, all right? Timeless. Next, Tome of Adventure Design. This is by Matt Finch. He just came out with the 2nd edition of it. It's a hardcover book. The back of the book tables of, what's in a room, what's, dungeon creation ideas for what's on the level, who to fight. Everything that you could possibly randomize when creating a dungeon adventure, whatever it is, you can use that book to do. And this latest edition, he came up with a bunch of, what he did was, I forget the name of the concept, but on the borders of the book, he writes just random words that all relate to something. Interesting, like thousands of different words in various orders and arrangements all along the side. So you're subliminally taking them in, and it might inspire you in a way you don't even know you're being inspired by. Don't worry, it's not subliminally trying to get you to buy all his stuff or give you all his money, but it's an excellent book. I know Tim Shorts uses it religiously to roll up, because you just roll up things. I'm in a log jam here. What am I going to do? I have a writer's block. What should I create now? Well, let me get the Toad, T-O-A-D, Tome of Adventure Design. Grind a table as appropriate, roll D100, and just pick something. Or, I use it sometimes to just scan for ideas. I pick stuff. I never do a random roll on my designing of things. I'll just pick stuff. Say, that looks like a cool thing. Honorable mention is the next thing. D30 Sandbox Companion. It's a D30 random table book of a lot of things that Tome of Adventure Design covers. Get it in PDF, I believe. I don't think you get a print copy, but I have a PDF. It's pretty good, too. It's you can print that up and take it with you on the road, whereas Tome of Adventure Design is going to be, a part of your bulletproof vest. It's that thick, right? So, next, Dungeon Alphabet. This is by Goodman Games. This was all the rage back in the day, and it's still, I don't know, on their 5th printing now or something. It's a fantastic book. It's like, you know, A is for apple, B is for boy, blah, blah, blah. A is for altar, B is for, I don't know, whatever the fuck, right? But, and then you see altar, and there's like a you know, random table of 20 things, or, you know, multiple tables that this altar has, you know, is it, you know, roll a dice, dark, roll another die, and it's filled with a bowl of water, and another die, and it's an altar to so-and-so, another die. It's you know, if you touch it with your right hand, you transport to the plane of Orcus, you know, stuff like that. So each letter is for a certain thing. S is for statues, you know, stuff like that. And if you want to throw a statue in, boom, pull out the S. S is for statues. Roll up something. It's a random generation thing. So it's a thin little book, but well worth it. Okay. Next, how to make a fantasy sandbox. This is the thing I mentioned in the other video earlier in this video. By Rob Connolly. I edited this thing, so I'm a little bit biased, but I gotta say, honest to God, there's very few things that I've read that I feel made me a better DM. You know, this is one of them. I mean, Rob and I think alike. There's something to be said for, like, we think along the same wavelengths, but he's been thinking about this shit much, much longer than I have. He said he has like a 40-year campaign going on. Literally 40-year campaign. You know, and you get new players and new PCs, but the world develops, the campaign develops. 40 fucking years. And he's learned a lot and how to run a fantasy sandbox campaign, and it's all right there in that book. All right. Next, of course, Black Marsh. I mentioned that earlier too. It's his setting. All right. That will be a part of his official setting, but right now Black Marsh is there and it's free. It's free. Pick it up. You'll see how to make a fantasy sandbox in action through Black Marsh. Okay. Next, Stronghold Builder's Guidebook, and you're thinking, huh? This is a what? This doesn't make sense. Isn't that a book that came out for 3rd edition? Well, yes, it is, boys and girls. It's perhaps the only good 3rd edition book that Wizards of the Coast, or one of the very few that they ever put out that's any good. It's basically how to build different structures, strongholds, castles, keeps, buildings, whatever it is. It has costs associated. It has what it's going to take, what comes with it. I've used that in every campaign, no matter what system. It's worth it. The least you would have to do is maybe if your currency is, you know, Monty Hall or you know, cheap, you might have to adjust what things cost, but that's easily done. It's a great book for that purpose. Okay. Next, Swords and Wizardry has a book, Mythmere Games rather, for Swords and Wizardry, called City Encounters. It's a book of what you might encounter in a city. Literally, that's all it is. It's a book of city encounters. Tim Shorts turned me on to this book, as so many others. He's like a good resource. Hey, you ever heard this book, Joe? I'm like, no, what is it? Boom, 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 I buy it. Inevitably, it's always good. If he's recommended it, it's always good. And it's a great book. Just, you know, what might you encounter in a city? Here's a random table, you know, for various things that might happen. Get that book and you'll enjoy it. Okay. Next, this is interesting because I literally just came across this book for the very first time while at ShireCon. All right, it's the AD&D 2nd edition campaign source book and catacomb guide. It was a ridiculous name because there's not a goddamn thing in there about catacombs at all. I don't know why they called it the catacomb guide, but it's a campaign source book, and you're like, well, what the hell does that mean? Honestly, I read about this recently. What it comes down to is when AD&D 2nd edition came out with a DM guide, they said there's a lot of ways to become a great DM, but we're not going to teach any of that shit. We're just going to give you the tools and tables and how to run the game and not teach you how to be a great DM. And so I guess there was probably 100 pages or whatever written for this, but they never made it to the book. And so later on they said, oh, you know what? We got these 100 pages here. It's a no-brainer. Let's dump it into something else. And they came out with the campaign source book and catacomb guide. No catacombs, but it's basically how to be a DM written in the 2nd edition era. And I've skimmed it. I've read a couple paragraphs, and it's one of those books I want to sit down and just, you know, with a deck and a beer, you know, on the back deck and just digest this thing because it's really, really good. It's an excellent resource. Okay. One of the other few things that Wizards, or TSR, I think definitely back in the day, put out, the Aurora's Whole Realms catalog. Now, any old hippies back in the day, you know what I'm talking about when I say the Whole Earth catalog. It was how to live off the grid. It was a catalog of catalogs. It was if you want to live the hippie lifestyle, live off the grid and self-sufficiency or whatever other things. It was a kind of a random catalog that went through various editions and iterations. I have two copies on my shelf right now. It's kind of neat. It's like if you want to, it was a list of things that you could maybe buy, all right? And so Aurora's Whole Realms catalog took that same style and basically said, okay, Aurora, the merchant of Waterdeep, I think it was, this is her catalog, as if she had printed catalogs, like the Sears Roebuck catalog from back in the day. Here's what you can buy and how much. And she sells it at her store or on the road in her caravan. and you get an idea. There's so many cool products in there that you can have your players buy. I mean, that you would not randomly ever think of. Well worth it. Well worth it. Okay. Next, we're going to get to a couple monster books, because honestly, you can never have enough monster books. But there are 3 in particular that are right behind me right now within arm's reach all the time that I think are fantastic. 1, Tome of Horrors Complete. There is many Tome of Horrors. The Tome of Horrors Complete for Swords and Wizardry is the compilation of all the best of all of them. And that's a OSR Games thing. You can pick that up right now from OSR. Okay, the link is on the link page. Next, Tome of Beasts from Kobold Press. There were other Tome of Beast books, but the one from Kobold, the very first one, I think was the best. The other ones, not worth it. Tome of Beast, the first one, was very, very good. Okay. Next, Monstrosities for Swords and Wizardry. That was a Matt Finch book. You could only get it on Amazon from what I've seen. That's where I got mine. Again, Tim Short's reference. He loves, you cannot, if you put a book in front of Tim Short's, he will buy it if it's a monster book. So he has everyone ever published. So that was excellent. Another Tim Short's reference. Goods and Gear by Kenzer and Company. It's on drive-through. It's the ultimate adventure gear book that adventurers might buy. I mean, from you want to buy a Byzantine helmet, here's the price, and here's what it does. It's stunning, the level of detail that went into this thing. Stunning. I can't describe it. This is the ultimate gear book. Every campaign could use this book. Okay. Another one every campaign could use is A Magical Medieval Society, Western Europe. It is an awesome look at actual authentic Western Europe societies and how would they be, how they organized, how they arranged, the manor system and all that stuff, merchants and trades and all that. And basically a magical medieval society. They threw a layer of magic on it and said, this is how it would act, this is how it would work. So the 3rd edition is out now. Along with that, from the same folks, you're definitely going to want to get Silk Road, which is about, trade on the Silk Road in our times, but you could always use that for any campaign. And then Ecology and Culture. Magical Society, Ecology and Culture. For all the world builders out there, that's a vital book. All right, they're right up there with Rob's book. All right, now, a new one. Damn you, Tim, you turned me on to these, and I'm stuck in this cycle of buying them all. 2 Kickstarters have finished, and the 3rd one has just started. The first 2, the Herbalist's Primer and the Geologist's Primer by Renegade Game Studios. It's basically a list of all the herbs and all the rocks and minerals and what they're good for, what they're used for, and then they drop it and say, in a fantasy game, here's what you could do with them. Boom. The one they're kickstarting right now, which is live at the time of this video, is the Mycologist's Primer for mushrooms. I can't wait, because I'm always looking for a table of random mushrooms. Like, you eat this mushroom that you found in the woods. What happens? We all want to have the magical mushroom experience in our game for our players to have to deal with, right? So I can't wait till that book comes out. They take a little long to fulfill, but Jesus Christ, are they worth it. The reproduction values on these things are amazing, okay? Now, this is going to be costly. This is something I've always wanted. I wanted to buy them back when I was a kid, but I could never afford them. The various spell compendiums. There's a priest spell compendium, a wizard spell compendium, and something called the Encyclopedia Magica. TSR put them out. I think the priest is 3 volumes, the wizard is 4, and the Encyclopedia Magica, as I turn behind me to look, is 4 volumes. It's essentially it was printed in the late 90s, and some lunatic decided they're going to task somebody with going through everything TSR has ever published. And if it was a priest spell, it goes into this book and it's alphabetized. If it was a wizard spell, it goes into the other 4 books, alphabetized. If it was a magic item, it goes into Encyclopedia Magica, alphabetized. And also by category for the Encyclopedia Magica. There were banners. There were dozens and dozens of magical banners I never even heard of. I don't know what obscure fucking module they were put in, but boom, banners if you want them. Like little things like that. So amazing source of reference. I use them all the time. Tim got me one because I told him I always wanted to buy them, but I couldn't afford it or whatever. So I think he sent me the wizard ones, which were costly, and I appreciate it because I edited his book, his Kickstarter. So he sent me those as a gift because I didn't want to get paid because I'm not an official real editor, So he sent me those as a gift. And I thanked him and cursed him because my OCD requires me to now buy all 4 priest compendiums and buy all 3 priest compendiums and all 4 Encyclopedia Magica compendiums. So his gift cost me like $800 or $900, motherfucker. So appreciate it, but you son of a bitch. All right, now I touched on this book way earlier in this show, Thieves of Lankhmar by Nigel Finley. It was a book that was put out by TSR related to the Lankhmar setting, and it's If you ever wanted to understand how to run a thieves guild, how to organize a heist, it is the best book I've ever seen on that. Well worth it. It's my go-to book to this day for all things thievery. It's system neutral. It doesn't matter. And if you want another book related to thieves, that's awesome. Remember, back in second edition, there were all these handbooks: the Fighter's Handbook, the Thieves Handbook, the Ranger's Handbook. The only one that was worth any shit at all was the Thieves Handbook, the second edition Thieves Handbook, and it was really pretty much solely because it had the list of thieves' tools and gadgets that you could use. They were all fun. Like, you buy things that make you help you climb, things that you blacken your skin so that you get a bonus to hide in shadows, things like that. And so there was a great book for that sort of a thing, right? One that Tim, I ran over this list with Tim on the phone, and he says, "Oh, you're missing one thing that's really awesome. The Shady Dragon Inn." It was a great resource because it had a map of an inn, you could lay it on the table, and had a whole list of NPCs that you might encounter at this inn. So you can use this in any campaign, any system, anywhere. Stats be damned, it doesn't really matter, okay? Now, one good thing, remember I said there's very few things that I've ever bought that I thought were actually great and actually helped me. We're coming up on 3 of them right now. The first of those 3 is called Arbiter of Worlds. It's actually a book. It's not an RPG book. It's a book you get on Amazon, written by Alexander Macris. He's the guy who wrote Axe, Adventurer, Conqueror, King. And this guy, myself, and Rob Connolly all think the same way in terms of realism in the world and how to build that real world and how to immerse your characters in that real world. And it's an amazing book. And he's incorporated all this stuff into his Axe game as well. So he has a whole video series. I didn't link to it here, but you could check it out. Alexander Macris, Arbiter of Worlds. He really goes over each chapter of the book in great detail and interprets it for you. So it's well worth it. All right. Now, Sly Flourish has a book called Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. This is one of the other ones that I said, you know what, I've learned something here, because it also it tells you how to prep for your games. And it's a great, simple, good book to tell you how to prep for game sessions. I'm notorious for over-prepping. And this guy gets into the nitty-gritty of what to do, how to do it, and that way you're always, just a little bit ahead. And it fits along the same way I think, but it's like he got into my brain and articulated the way I think and made me understand how I think so I could get better at how I think of those things. If that makes any fucking sense. So another one that was a great one is a book by Goodman Games called How to Write Adventure Modules That Don't Suck. Now, here's the thing. There was an original one that he wrote, or somebody wrote. I think Goodman himself wrote this. It's like 32 pages long. It's a series of essays by various authors and also by Goodman himself talking about what he looks for in an adventure module. I think it was originally like, if you want to submit adventures to Goodman Games for publication, know these things. This is what I'm looking for. And he got some other people to write some other essays that talk about various aspects of how to publish adventures. It was so popular, the original 32-page one, that he later put out a big, thick hardcover book. Now, the big, thick hardcover book sucks. I got to say it. It sucks. It's terrible. And the problem is that if you buy the thick hardcover book, you get the original 32-page book for free. Now, that's the only way that I could find to get the original 32-page book. That's it. I can't find it anywhere else unless the PDF fairy delivers it to you, if you know what I mean. So, but get the original 32-page How to Write Adventure Modules That Don't Suck. Ironically, the book on that sucks. Lighter book, so who knew? Another one here, as you hear the sounds ruffling, I'm pulling these books up and I'm looking at them. It's called Bestial Ecosystems by Courtney Campbell. Remember, he was one of the ones I sat with James Radji and just shot the shit with the whole, for hours in North Texas that year. We all took a cab back, or a Uber back together to the con, too. A tiny Uber, and none of us are small people. It was quite interesting, fitting in that Uber. Anyway, it's a hard-to-describe book, but Bestial Ecosystems, right? Like, if you look up, I'm pulling it out now. It's like he picks monsters, a whole shit ton of monsters, classic D&D monsters. Like I'm looking at Dragon Turtle, all right? He gives it nomenclature, different ways to describe them: shell beasts, living islands, sea dragons, blah, blah, blah. He gives a description. He gives you things that are known about them. Giant turtles that live on the sea. And then he gives you rumors and other things related to them. All right, some are so large that their shells are mistaken for islands. They very much enjoy the taste of salt. They often suckle on salty boulders or anchors of shipwrecks to satisfy their cravings. When agitated or defending a territory, they can spit these heavy objects from their maw at high speeds and cause tremendous damage. Little things like that maybe not make the rule books at all, but they give you so much fun flavor you could mess with in your game, to mess with your PCs with, because, what's more fun than messing with your PCs, right? And so this is definitely a great book. You're going to have merfolk in there, you're going to have nixies in there, you're going to have salamanders or rust monsters in there. Read this book. It gives you a lot of cool little things that you could do to mix it up. It's not, oh, here we go, rust monster encounter, got to do X, Y, Z. No, you give the Courtney Campbell flavor, and boom, it's a whole different kind of rust monster, right? So, excellent book. Now, here's a cool thing. The Pirate's Guide to Freeport. Now, Freeport, the modules that Green Ronin Games and Chris Promise of Green Ronin Games put out back in the 3rd edition days, the famous modules that were really fun, set in a pirate kind of a thing. He later created this setting called Freeport, where everything was based, and he made this book called The Pirate's Guide to Freeport. I have 2 copies. One because one of them I got had a little problem with the binding, and I let them know, and I sent them a picture, and they sent me a free one. So that goes let you know they're good people. But this book is it's a pirate island, and it's a tiny bit gonzo, but not so. And I don't like gonzo generally, but tiny bit gonzo, but not enough to kill it. And it's just a very detailed description of a pirate island, the internal politics, who's who, and it's a big thick book, right? And there's so much detail, so much things you could set an entire campaign there if you wanted to. Definitely going to be the basis of any pirate campaign I ever run. And it's the fun part about it was that there's no stat blocks, none. It's all fluff, no crunch, all setting. So definitely going to have fun with that. Speaking of setting, the Troll Lord guys, they put out, Castles and Crusades game. They came out with a bunch of codex books for world building. They have a resource book. It's all text, no crunch, for various real life human cultures throughout time. Like one set in Asia, one of them for Nordic times, one of them Germanic. They have one for everything you can imagine. They're still putting out more today. They're really good books. You can get the PDFs on a good deal, and every once in a while they have a sale. Buy all of them at one time, all the hardcovers, and boom, you get them all at once for really cheap. I think I bought like 6 for $100 or something one time on a sale. Well fucking worth it. Okay. Speaking of cultures, Tim tell me add this because I never played GURPS. So he and Rob played GURPS for a long time. And he's talking about, and I linked to a Noble Knight game here because GURPS put out a lot of books on history and culture, so much so that on Noble Knight they have their own category. The GURPS 1st through 3rd edition history and culture books. Every cultural group, every historical setting, whatever it is you want to know. Mesopotamia, boom, there's a book for it. Japan, there's a book for it, right? You're good to go. Scandinavia, book for it. The Vikings, you're good for it. Everything that you want to know is there. So just like the Castles and Crusades folks, the Troll Lords put out their codex books. Same thing here, culture books. Okay. Now, going a little bit different here. I'm going to throw in Call of Cthulhu. All right. I think every old schooler should definitely have and play at least once Call of Cthulhu. It's a fun game. You're going to go insane and die, and you'll never win, but it doesn't matter. It's a fun game, and you should do it because every D&D game should always have some horror elements. Even if the campaign is not a horror campaign, every once in a while there should be some horror elements, like Lamentations of the Flame Princess focuses on horror. You will learn how to run horror games by reading Call of Cthulhu. Now, most old schoolers agree that the 5th edition is the best. I linked to the 7th edition book here. You can probably pick up the 5th edition anywhere you want. It's online or wherever, pick a Noble Knight or whatever, but PDF, something like that. But yeah, definitely get it and take a look at it. And it's worth it just once to read it and play through it and just have a fun time because it'll help your D&D game if you play Call of Cthulhu. All right. Something related to that, Trail of Cthulhu. Now this is a Cthulhu kind of a game, but it uses the Gumshoe system, which is a detective system. The Gumshoe detective system is a merger between that and Call of Cthulhu, called Trail of Cthulhu. It's put out by Pelgrane Press, and the whole thing about the Gumshoe system is that the hard part is not getting the clues like Call of Cthulhu is. It's about clue interpretation. So if you got this whole set of clues, what do you do with it, right? You're going to get them. If you do the right thing, you're going to get the clues. Then you got to figure out what the hell are you going to do with it. That's the joy, the beauty. So if you're going to run a detective game, which I've done some mystery detective kind of games especially in a city or something like that, I used the Gumshoe system. I ported it into my 5th edition game in my own way, and boom, I was able to use Trail of Cthulhu and the Gumshoe system to help interpret some clues, and run a good detective game. They had a good time. All right. Now, Troll Lords, Castles and Crusades came out with a book called Yigsburg. Remember I talked about that a long time ago as a setting book that Gary Gygax wanted to put out there as a clone, I guess you could say, for his Greyhawk City. Well, Yigsburg is that book, and because they got the rights to publish it again, there's a new edition out there, so you're no longer paying hundreds and hundreds of dollars for the limited edition book that I have on my shelf. They got to publish the Yigsburg book again, and you could pick it up the reprints. Okay, now back to Raji, the creature guy, the scary creature guy. Raji, I think one of his very first things he ever published, and it was under Goodman Games, but he now has the rights back and he's publishing it under his own store, was the Random Esoteric Creature Generator. It's basically a list of tables, like of how to develop monsters. So you know how the Tome of Adventure Design is for developing dungeons and whatnot. This will help you develop monsters. From every various aspect of a monster you possibly could have. Does it have a poisonous stinger? Does it have claws? Does it have a beak? Whatever it is, and you can make your own horrible compilation monster, whatever you want. And it's really good for that purpose. Okay. And last but not least, almost last but not least, I got one more after this. Goodman's Ultimate Traps. So back in the day, these Grimtooth's Ultimate Traps. Grimtooth back in the day put out some trap books, I believe, for Judges Guild, I believe it was, and now he basically republished all these various nefarious trap books into one, the Ultimate Traps. Goodman is recently putting out a one of their old school adventures revisited or whatever series. There, I think number 8 is the Grimtooth trap book. I have the Ultimate Trap book, which you can get on Noble Knight. Once their Kickstarter, I believe, is finished, once they publish that, you can also buy that copy as well. Okay, and last but not least, and I'm only putting this book here because as sort of a placeholder and a representation of what else you can do. There's a book that's called Folklore, Mythology, and Legend. Many years ago, 15, 20 years ago, I asked people, what book do you have on your bookshelf that's indispensable as a DM that may not be an RPG book? And this book came up more than once, way more than once. It's an encyclopedia on folklore, mythology, and legend. It's a big-ass thick book. It's a heavy book, and it's every type of mythology, every type of legend, everything from everywhere, all around the world is in there. Shit I never heard of before. It's basically a college level book. I don't know what it's used for, but it's in colleges, but it's a college level book. It's an exhaustive list of everything you could have. Now I'm only putting this in there as a placeholder because there's so many other books. I mean, I'm looking back. William Butler Yeats put out a book called Irish Fairy Tales and Folklore, W.B. Yeats, right? Because he was big into that. So here's a book, boom, on my shelf for that. I'm just putting this out there because I wanted to let you guys know you don't have to just get D&D books and put them on your bookshelf, right? All RPG books are not the only references for RPG games. You should and could go out there. When I was running a Bronze Age game, I spent hundreds of dollars on Bronze Age books. And I got them right behind me on the shelf. And I read a bunch of them, and they're really good, and they informed me as to what I wanted to do. So don't limit yourself to RPG books only when you're a DM. There's so many other resources out there that are fantastic. Fantastic. Okay? So that sums up every book you should have on your shelf, or OSR resources everybody should have. Now, especially this one. I've asked you before. Please let me know if anything else comes to mind. But, please do, especially with this one, because I want to make an ultimate list. I want to make something that people could look at that'll stand the test of time, guys. So anything pops up that you think of, let me know. Next, we're going to get into resources to learn the real history of the hobby. I mean, I talked about the history here a bit, and that's just an overview, half hour long, but I'm talking about hardcore research on the history of the hobby. We're going to get into all that here next, okay? All right, guys, home stretch. Chapter 11 out of 13. This is called The History of the Hobby, all right? Because, I talked, like I said, briefly about the history of D&D and how it affects the old school Renaissance and the OSR and all that, but there are other books out there that would really give you great insight, way to hell more than I'm going to ever give you here, about the hobby, where it came from and everything. They're really, really fascinating books, and 3 of them are by one author, John Peterson. He's the not official, but he's the unofficial official historian of D&D, the role-playing game hobby, maybe even games in general. Okay, so amazing guy. He went to original sources, interviewed like everybody and their cousin who's still alive. He realized he needed a record of this stuff. People are dying off, so He wanted to get out there, talk to people, get the original documentation, getting into your basement or your closet or your attic and find out whatever you had, even if it's a random ass piece of paper from when he worked at TSR or Judges Guild or something like that. And he really did an excellent job researching. So the first book I'm going to talk about is called Playing at the World. Now this book, I'm holding it in my hand here. It is 700 pages long. It's a history of, I'm reading from the cover, a history of simulating wars, people, and fantastic adventures from chess to role-playing games. So that really is a good understanding of what the hell it's all about. It's about games and gaming, the history of it, where it all came from, everything you need to know. It's an amazing thing. Tim Kask, I think, and he did a recommendation in the back. And Games Magazine, Village Voice did a recommendation. Jeff Grubb, who authored Manual of the Planes, did a recommendation. I mean, CEO Wizards of the Coast, Peter Atkinson, former CEO Wizards of the Coast, did a recommendation. Peter says, it applies a higher standard of research than any other work on the history of the role-playing games I've seen. Check out the awesome book. Yeah, it's an amazing thing. If you're into the history of games, gaming, especially simulation, war simulation, D&D, I mean, it really shows you where, from chess to the dawn of role-playing games, everything about our hobby. It's something else. I look at the table of contents here. The rise of wargaming club, blah, 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 medieval fantasy genre, classes, the rules of the game, rules and immersion. It's conventions, everything you could possibly want to know about the history of games and gaming, leading right up to D&D. Really fantastic. Really a fantastic book. So I can't recommend it enough. It's a deep dive. It's a scholarly research book. It's not all about the jazz and pizzazz. You know what I mean? You're going to want to put your thinking cap on when you read this thing. Okay. The next one, again, same author, Game Wizards. This is the epic battle for Dungeons and Dragons. And this is basically Joe Manganiello. He says, Jean sets straight the canon of the tragic history of how Dungeons and Dragons and TSR were ripped from the very grasp of the man who dreamed them up. In other words, how Gary lost to D&D, how Gary lost TSR, all the drama. It's like a subset of his original book, but in way more detail. From the very beginning to when he was booted out of his own company. That's about 300 pages long. Really good book. Okay, that's more accessible to me. I'm not into the history of everything. I want to know that. All right. So his third book is Slaying the Dragon. I'm sorry. The Elusive Shift. Slaying the Dragon is coming. How role-playing games forged their identity. All right. So basically, this is about when role-playing games shifted. It's again a scholarly look at it. When games shifted from basically war games to role-playing games, and what happened then, and how it shifted into maturity, what we have now. All right, so he's like the D&D scholar, this guy, John Peterson. 3 books that he put out, all of them excellent. Okay, now another book called Slaying the Dragon by Ben Riggs. It's a secret history of D&D. It's a lot about the history of D&D, but it's interesting. It's more of a personal account of it. He writes it almost like fiction. You know what I mean? In a way, but he gets into, I don't know, it's like a story. He puts the history into a story, in more of a story form. It's way more accessible than a dry factual book. All right, so it's more of a story form. And some of the stuff I think he interprets in his own way as to what happened or what must have happened or what's going on in his head. That's how you know what's going on in his head, right? That sort of thing. So that's pretty cool too. Now, Judges Guild, all right? Again, not get into the drama and the bullshit, but Judges Guild, Goodman Games, I believe, put out a couple of books related to them. They're on Noble Knight only, I think, at this point. They are huge books. They are like 11 by 17. They are heavy as shit. Highest quality production values you could ever imagine in a book. And they're all about Judges Guild stuff. One is the first one, Volume 1, Deluxe Collector's Edition, Volume 1. And basically what you're going to get in that is a history of Judges Guild. You're going to get everything behind the scenes, original papers and documentations and all that sort of thing. I'll read the table of contents to you so you get more of an idea. All right, so let's see. Goodman Games did an interview Bob Bledsaw, Old and New Judges Guild, Thieves of Madagascar and Sunnyside. We have Judges Guild journals. The initial journal, you have actually full publications of multiple journals in here. They publish some adventure modules: Citadel of Fire, Thieves of Fortress Badabaskor, Teagle Manor, the Temple of Thesagus, and they give you some catalogs. And in this book too, there's also essays, a lot of essays from people talking about Judges Guild. Full reproductions, 11 by 17. That's volume 1. Volume 2 is all about Janelle Jaques. All right, volume 2 is all of her works from back in the day. She was prolific, and she put out the very best Judges Guild things you're ever going to see. All right. So a lot of essays, introductory articles, and then you get into the Dungeoneer, which is, I think, a zine that Janelle had back in the day. And Judges Guild journals, you have full reproductions of all of those. Essays by her, she recently passed. And then you're going to get adventure modules: Dark Tower, Caverns of Thracia, Books of Treasure Maps, and then some concluding thoughts. So those books are fantastic. They're so beautiful. They're like tabletop books, but you never want to put it on a tabletop, because if you spill a coffee on or something, you're going to kill yourself. All right, so these are just fantastic books as references for the history of what happened back in the day with Judges Guild from their point of view. All right, Goodman Games still putting out books, like I mentioned before earlier in the video a couple different times. Original Adventures Reincarnated. They're taking the old stuff and they're making it new again. You're going to get a book full of essays, sort of the same thing I just described. A book full of essays talking about the original whatever, Temple of Elemental Evil, Keep on the Borderlands, Dark Tower, whatever it may be. And then you're going to get the original Dark Towers in multiple editions and publications that they put out. Facsimile in there, and then you're going to get the 5th edition version of it. So if you want to run Dark Tower for 5th edition, boom, buy it. There it is. Want to run Temple of Elemental Evil for 5th edition, boom, buy it. There it is. And the cool thing is that most of these books do not have PDFs. You got to buy the book. I think only the latter ones are you able to get the PDFs for. So if you want to buy them, hop on Amazon. That's the best place. I give it a link to the Goodman Games on Amazon there. Not so much last, but second to last, Art and Arcana. That was put out by Sam Witwer's brother, and I think in cooperation with Wizards of the Coast. It's a book of art all throughout the history of D&D, from TSR to current day. All the art, and talking about changes in artistic style. They have full pictures of various bits of artwork, from Lotus, Larry Elmore, to modern stuff, like a lot of stuff you're seeing here, on the show here, the black and white stuff. I really enjoy the black and white art, but a lot of stuff you're seeing here, it's a beautiful coffee table book, beautiful slipcase. It's, I think, put out by Wizards, at least in cooperation with Wizards, but it's something you just sit down there and just page through and make sure there's nothing that's going to spill on it while you're drinking it, right? I think lastly, you gotta mention, in terms of history and reference and all that, go back to the older Dragon magazines, go back to the older Dungeon magazines. You'll see articles in there, that the first time you're ever going to see a barbarian class is in there, right? That's where you're going to see it. See where it came from, see where it's at now. You see the origin of various things, especially the first 100 issues. They're the hardest to get because they're the oldest, obviously, and I'm trying like hell to get them. I got a bunch of the pre-100 ones. I don't have a full collection because I don't want to get into that OCD trap, skipping rent someday and buying them all, right? But yeah, I don't want to get there, right? But the older ones, the older Dragon, the older Dungeon. Another magazine out there you want to find older copies of is White Dwarf. I mean, that was the magazine that was all related to desktop miniatures, put out in England. It was related to Warhammer, but they did have a lot of stuff in D&D in there, right? Because it was a definite crossover. So get White Dwarf as well. All right, so those are the cool resources you want to dive into to learn more about the history of the hobby, guys. All right, next section is going to be about movies and TV shows that are sort of inspirational. Maybe not D&D exactly, but things that are definitely old school, will inspire you in old school ways. Okay. All right, guys, so movies and TV shows. Now, the origin of this whole list came from back when I was running a game in a game store for a group that was pretty much mostly, except for one woman who was actually 10 years older than me at the time, in her 60s. This group was kids. By kids, I mean 20s. You know what I mean? Because when you're this old, everybody's 20 is a kid, right? So I was running this game, 5th edition, and I was running it old school style with my, nefarious house rules to make it more old school and feel and this and that. And I was trying to get them to understand the feel of D&D. I knew I could recommend Fritz Leiber and all these other books, Elric, but they're not going to read because kids don't read, right? So I needed to find a way to convey to them the style, the feel of old school D&D, what I'm looking for, what kind of game, what kind of adventures, what kind of stuff they're going to be encountering here. And so I went on the blog and I reached out to everybody and I said, hey, Told him the situation. I said, give me some movies and TV shows that are going to sort of give them the vibe and feel of, old school. Something that, passes along like, what I'm looking to get out there to them. And so there's a huge list. Everybody contributed. It was fucking awesome. And I had some of my own, obviously, and I took the best of the best and I made them into a list. And I'm gonna give you the best of the best right here. Okay. So the funny thing was what I did with these guys is I said, listen, you watch these, and for everyone you watch, and I think I made a list with 10. Everyone you watch, your character will get 500 XP. So all they had to do was go home, watch a fucking movie or TV show, and they come next week, 500 XP more for the character. So they were all in on this because all they got to do is sit and watch TV. That's easy. Netflix and chill kind of level, right? So it was perfect. So that's what I did. And so I'm going to go through the list of all these movies and TV shows. Now, you're going to be shocked because a lot of them have nothing to do with D&D or fantasy or anything like that. All right? Nothing at all whatsoever. But they are awesome and give the same fucking vibe as D&D, right? So first one, definitely fantasy. Conan the Barbarian with Schwarzenegger. All right, gotta watch it, gotta see it. Jesus Christ, it's the best interpretation of Conan ever. Well written, well acted. Well acted, did he act or not? He can barely speak the language, right? Well done movie. Okay, totally gives the vibe of swords and sorcery. And I'm one of the few who liked Conan the Destroyer. I thought that was a great damn movie because it gave the tone of a 1980s adventure. You're on a quest to get the thing, and here's what happens along the way, right? So perfect. All right, next, Highlander. The original movie, maybe some of the series, but the movie definitely, only the very first movie. Every movie after the first was a cash grab that sucked ass, but the very first Highlander, cannot beat it. I mean, the Kurgan, I can't tell you how many stand-ins for the Kurgan I've had in all my different games over the years, right? So definitely got to watch the Highlander movie. Next, there can be only one. I could not pass off, I couldn't say Highlander without saying that, right? So next, Excalibur, all right? The old Excalibur movie, and just because I'm saying Excalibur, I have to throw in Monty Python and Holy Grail. It's probably the most quoted, other than Star Wars, the most quoted movie at the D&D table is Monty Python and Holy Grail. So yeah, and Excalibur just because it's fucking epic. I mean, Jesus Christ, right? I was just in a Walmart or something, and I got the Blu-ray version for like $2. I'm like, shit, man. I don't know if Blu-ray player works, but I'm gonna pick that shit up, right? So anyway, next, Tombstone, the movie with Val Kilmer was Doc Holliday. That is such a badass kind of thing to have, that kind of a town, that kind of vibe, those kind of badasses walking around in your game. I mean, that's it. If you could emulate those 4 guys in Tombstone, your PCs and all that, you're rocking an old school game right there as players. Okay, next, 7 Samurai. Enough said. 7 fucking samurai, right? Next, Lord of the Rings, because fucking duh, Lord of the Rings. The Peter Jackson shit, none of that crap on Amazon now. That's an abomination. It should not exist, and everybody involved should be just fucking thrown into the ocean in the deepest part. They're terrible. They're fucking terrible. But the original Lord of the Rings, the Peter Jackson one's epic. Hobbit, stretched out too long, but you kind of got to watch it anyway. If you're not going to read the books, watch the freaking movies. Or as my brother does, listen to the audiobooks. Every fall, he re-listens to the Lord of the Rings out there next to his fire pit and just goes through the entire thing. So yeah, fun thing. Anyway, next, Unforgiven, Clint Eastwood. Another kind of hardcore town, gunslinger. I mean, gunslinger, guy with a sword, guy with a gun, same fucking thing, but it captures the vibe of a badass in a badass town. And he's like, and you never know what's going to happen, right? It's a tough environment. It's not a sanitized, wussified bullshit town like Phandalin or something like that. This is a badass town. You want that vibe? Watch The Unforgiven. All right. Next, Alien. Alien for the horror, Alien for the fear, Alien because it's goddamn Alien and Sigourney fucking Weaver. You gotta watch Alien and try to carry that over into all your horror stuff, all right? Terminator, duh, 1 and 2, especially 2, but holy shit, right? Your bad guy, if he's like Arnold in the first one, and then maybe he makes an ally of the bad guy in the second one, I mean, that's a trope that could go on forever, and multiple games that you run, okay? Now, I'm going to throw out first couple Indiana Jones movies. Not all of them, obviously, but the first couple were pretty fucking good. I enjoyed the hell out of them. And by the way, guys, you're not going to get a link for all these in movies and TV because, look on Amazon, you'll find them all there, all right? Willow, a lot of people didn't like it. They thought it was a wussified thing, but I thoroughly enjoyed it back in the day. I thought it was kind of fun. It was a good movie. It really was a good movie. Another Val Kilmer thing, right? So Val Kilmer's making it in several appearances here. Definitely worth it. So watch Willow. you have to watch Heavy Metal, the movie. It was a cartoon. It was, a Heavy Metal magazine. Remember that whole thing? Heavy Metal, the movie, the original cartoon. Brutal, hardcore, epic. I mean, holy shit. The vibe of that thing was awesome. It was fucking awesome, and you just have to see it. Along with Clash of the Titans. All right, any of that sort of, the claymation crap, or not claymation, whatever the hell it was, that they used, the style of animation that they used for the monsters and all that. It was amazing, and Clash of the Titans was, to me, the epitome of all of it. Okay, I'm blanking on the name right now, and I don't have the time to look it up, but I know I'm going to get mocked and ridiculed for not getting the name of it down right. But you know what I'm talking about. You say Clash of the Titans and all the other stuff that the guy who made that up put out there in the world. That's what it's all about. All right, 2 cartoons that we all grew up with. Of course, the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon. We got. We got the DM, we got Avenger. I mean, that shit, you can't beat that shit. It was fantastic. The D&D cartoon was hokey and stupid, but fun. And funny thing is that some South America country or whatever put out a car commercial with the D&D kids in it. There's no link here for that. Google that shit. But it was fantastic. And I was like, oh my God, this was epic. It was the D&D characters from the cartoon, live action, doing a car commercial. It was fucking awesome. And I'm like, Jesus, why can't they use these people and make a real series out of this with these kids? It was great. They had everybody. They had Bobby the Barbarian and all. I mean, it was awesome. It was awesome, man. And again, along the same lines, Thundar the Barbarian with Ukla and Ariel. All right, everybody knows Thundar with the Sun Sword and all that shit. That was fantastic too. Now, these next 3 I'm putting in here under protest because I will catch epic levels of shit from everybody I play D&D with if I don't, all the old school guys. First, Eric turned me on to something called Hawk the Slayer. I watched it, and even drunk and stoned, I could not understand what the hell the appeal was, except the fact that it was put out in the 80s, and it was a movie that everybody, apparently except me, watched in the 80s. It never made my list. I didn't know that anybody would watch it. Never made my list. But Hawk the Slayer, I guess you got to watch it just to laugh at it, if nothing else. Next, Krull. He had that weird thing, that like a massive Chinese star thing that you throw in, a shuriken or whatever the hell it was, and it was dumb. It was goddamn dumb. And Tim, yes, I'm adding, because of you, Robin of Sherwood. Worst goddamn Robin Hood series I've ever seen, and you're going to probably kill my character tomorrow, Monday, in our game because I've said that. But yes, worst goddamn Robin Hood movie I've ever seen, but he swears by it, says it was the most awesome goddamn Robin Hood thing he's ever. He loved it. Oh my God, I watched an episode. I'm like, what am I watching? How? I watched 2 just to make sure it wasn't just the first one. I'm like, no, it just sucks balls. But like I said, Hawk the Slayer, Krull, and Robin Hood, Robin of Sherwood rather, I had to put them in there or else I get crucified by my peeps. So yeah, don't watch them. Or do, just to mock them. But there's your list. Movies and TV shows that if your players watch it, it will get an old school vibe and feel out of it. It'll convey a sense of what you're trying to convey in your game. So that's the movies and TV. Next, I'm going to get to the final chapter of how to actually get into the OSR, where to meet us, how to get into it, what to do. All right, so that's coming up next. All right, guys, you've suffered through, I don't know how long this is at this point because I'm recording it straight back to back, but I'm recording it in chunks. You know what I mean? And I'm dropping each chapter in its individual video and in my file folder. So not sure how long we're up to, maybe 3 or 4 hours, but you suffered through that long so far, and you're saying, all right, you asshole, I've listened to you this far. How do I actually get into the OSR? I'm sold. Stop talking and show me how to join. What do I do? Is there a membership card? Where's my peeps? Where's my new peeps? So, all right, here's what you're going to do. There's communities. Like I talked about before, there's a scattering, like in Dune, there was a scattering to the cosmos of all the OSR peeps that were around back in the day after Google Plus shit the bed and got closed down. So what do you want to do? You want to find some people, right? You want to find your group. You want to find your tribe. All right, so first, the blogs and the boards, all the ones I mentioned, are still there. Dive in. Learn more about the history and the theory and see how everything came about. You could go back to old posts. You could sort by age and all that stuff of the post and learn about it, And one new one that Rob Connolly's been talking about lately, that's OSR friendly. Not devoted to OSR specifically, but definitely OSR friendly. A lot about OSR stuff on there is the RPG Pub. So in addition to all the blogs and boards I linked to earlier, here's a new one for it, the RPG Pub. So check that out. I've not been there yet, but I take his word for it. That's pretty good. All right. Second, obviously, YouTube. That's why you're here, right? YouTube channels like mine. I'll throw you a couple more, all right? Besides mine, obviously Tankar's Tavern, all right? He's been doing it shit longer than me, and he's got thousands of videos out there. Dive into it. Now, Eric does a lot of news and reviews and a lot of interviews and all that stuff, and a lot of live streams. He does Gamers Health, and then we once in a while we'll do a live stream game. So yeah, definitely get into Tankar's Tavern. Tim, Gothridge Manor. We always pretty much live stream together. He's lacking in subs, guys, so pop on there, subscribe to his channel. Maybe you get more subs, he'll actually encourage him to do more videos rather than just these live streams with me, okay? Next, great guy. I've met him several times. He goes to ShireCon. Daniel from Bandits Keep. He's a really cool dude. Really good way about him. Does excellent videos about old school gaming, and does a lot of good stuff about solo videos too. So that's kind of fun. So get into his, and the link is there for Bandits Keep. And lastly, for YouTube channels, there's a million, right? But I'm just giving you 4. Flint Fireforge. He's a new friend. He's in our text group now. He's been joining us in our Monday night games. He does our live talks with them and all that. We interviewed him on our channel, my channel and Tim's, and so he's a cool dude. And he has, like I said before, he has a zine out there. So click. I have the link there for his YouTube channel. Okay. Now, as to other places, first Reddit. Skip Reddit. That is a goddamn shit show. Reddit is so fucking toxic. There's so many assholes there, it's like a fucking proctologist's wet dream. Just ignore Reddit. Even the OSR group, they're terrible. It's a terrible place to be. Just ignore it. It's a place of last resort. Like if everything else drops and crashes, then you might go to Reddit, right? Honestly, Facebook is the main place to be. I'm going to give you 2 links that'll get you started, because those 2 links will lead you to other things, all right? So first one is the OSR group on Facebook. There's a couple different ones, but the one I'm giving you here is the one to go to. It's like a few thousand members. Eric Tankar, Jack Christopher, they're all moderators there. So, you know, they got the stamp of approval from all my buddies. So OSR group, they actually talk about stuff. There's not just a place to post things. And then there's Tankar's Tavern as a Facebook group, okay? And he's also has a Discord channel, so if you hop on the tavern, you get his link to his Discord and talk live time with all of us there too, all right? There's a thing called MeWe out there that once Google Plus shit to bed, we all migrated to MeWe. We thought it was going to be the next great thing, but it turned out not to be. It didn't have the functionality. It's kind of a dead place. I still post there, links to my shows, but there's no real discussion going on, so you can skip MeWe, all right? Now, we have live videos too, guys. Live play videos, all right? So if you want a good video from all of us random party generator guys that are on every other Friday night on Eric's and my channel, we have a video. We swore never to do this. We swore we would never actually do a live stream of us playing D&D because we're a bunch of old people, and within 5 minutes we'd be fucking canceled. We say the wrong things, it's all over. Next thing you know, the cancellation police show up and blah blah blah, right? So we said never will it happen. But when Shadow Dark came out, we all got the bug, and I said, you know what, guys, why don't we just give this a shot? Why don't we play it? And I nominated Matt Jackson to run it. So he was all into it. So he's like, all right. So he came up with a quick and dirty adventure because he had the maps. He ran us through it, and we were all learning how to play Shadow Dark and playing the first session all at the same time. We're having a great fucking time in that video. In fact, we sent it to Kelsey, who created Shadow Dark. We linked it to her channel, and I ran into her at North Texas a year and a half ago. She loved it. Introduced myself. Oh my, that's you. Blah blah blah. Yeah. And she said she loved our video. She watched it a couple times, and she recommends it, the link to everybody who wants to learn how to play, especially old school guys, but anybody. She's linked that video out all over the place to people who want to learn how to play Shadow Dark, because it shows that if a bunch of 50-something-year-olds can learn a new system, on the fly and play it and have a great fucking time, anybody can. And so you want to see us all playing a game, everybody, even Matt Jackson, the elusive Matt Jackson. He's a DM. Log in. You'll see us all trying to chase Greg Christopher's character down and just kill him. It was a goddamn shit show. I nearly died in the first 5 minutes. It was a fucking shit show. And again, as I've mentioned elsewhere in this video, Tim Shorts runs an excellent Shadow Dark game on our channels every Monday. It's coming up. Right now it's Sunday night, 7:50. I am doing this video Monday night at 7 o'clock. So about a little less than 24 hours from now, you'll be watching me and Tim, if you want, run Shadow Dark. He's running it, we're playing it, we're trying to stay alive, and because I shit all over his Robin Hood goddamn TV show, I'm sure he's going to take extra special attention to me tomorrow, my guy. And I linked a couple other videos in there. Some of my best videos have been on YouTube over the years. The last couple of years I've been doing this is ones that would help OSR folks get into help 5e folks or whatever new school gamers get into the OSR. And so my biggest one has the most views, almost 30,000, is how to run your first OSR campaign if you're coming from 5e. And this is because I would just ended my 5e campaign. I was just starting up my second edition campaign. And so I was talking about what I do, how I develop the world, how I, the region, and then the NPCs and the PCs and all the motivations and the economics of everything that going into it. It's a really good video. I'm kind of proud of it. I haven't watched it in a bit, but I know it stands a test of time. Another one I have is how to help 5e players adjust to old school style game, which I touched on a bit in here, but I really flesh out that aspect of it. So that's great for DMs. As a compliment to that, I did a video that went further in depth about just setting player expectations for your old school or OSR campaign, right? So how to let your players know, how to set their expectations. So the adjustment that I talked about in the other video is not so bad. How to set their expectations. Let them know what they're in for. All right. And that goes along maybe having them watch some of these, watch this video or watch some of those movies or read some of these fiction books that we talked about. All right. And then lastly, one more video that I have in there, the more recent one that's kind of popular, is I've been talking for years about dungeons have to make sense. I mean, the old school dungeons, the design never made sense architecturally, structurally, was stupid. Oh, Funhouse Dungeon doesn't have to. And, how did this dragon get in a 10 by 10 room if all the hallways were down, 5-foot wide hallways? How the hell did he get there? And how was he not dealt with the goblins in the room across the hall from him? That kind of shit, right? And so my go-to has always been, where do the orcs take a crap? It has to make sense. Where do orcs crap? Or, there has to be an ecology to a dungeon or to adventure or to a setting. Everything has to have an ecology that makes sense. I like that level of realism. Rob Connolly does as well. You'll see that in his books and his publications. Arbiter of Worlds, Alexander Macris has that level. You will understand what I'm talking about once you get into that sort of thing. And after you watch this video too, I get really into depth about, in more depth about that. So anyway, this is the ultimate OSR resource guide, guys. I think it's, like I said, it's my love letter to the OSR. It's my thank you to everybody I've ever dealt with and played with and talked to and conversed with in the OSR, living or dead, past, present, and I hope for the future to meet a lot more of you folks. Meet me up at conventions, things like that. But I hope this helps you. I hope this is something that really stands the test of time and it's evergreen. And like I said, I truly do want you to comment, not just because it helps the algorithm, but because I want this to grow and be a living, breathing thing. I want to know if there's new things that come up that you say, hey, here's a good resource, or here's a new thing, or a movie, or a show, or whatever the case may be. Or even if, hey, you were wrong about this, man, you misinterpreted it, or this book is not what you thought it was, or maybe I got screwed up on something, right? Little things like that. So let me know, and I will check all your comments forever, I promise you. And I will look at them, I'll check them out, I'll correct myself, and I will change and add to links if I have to. And if I give you a dead link, if a link is dead at some point, because links die, right? Let me know, and I'll change the link to what's more current. And basically, what I'll probably do is every 6 months or a year, I'll do a new video which goes over all the updates, like a changelog video. You know what I mean? So it's not just a link thing, but a video that refers you to more of the new links. Okay, so it's just an appendix, I guess. We'll get all the new appendixes to this video. But listen, I don't know how long this has taken so far. I suspect about 4 hours once I compile it, and I'll drop it all into one big massive video tonight. Then I'm just going to crash and go to hell to bed because Jesus Christ, this has been an entire weekend. It's all I've done is this video, from the prep to the recording and everything else. And I'll publish it in a while. It's about 8 o'clock now, and I appreciate you guys listening this long. I really hope it helps you. I hope you jump into the OSR, feet first, and really the water's fine, people are cool, and it's not a bunch of old bastards just criticizing, you guys don't know how to play D&D. It's not us. There's always those assholes, right? But for the most part, we're looking for new people to play with, because honestly, the people we're playing with are getting old and dying. So we're always looking for new peeps, and we want to spread the joy that we've had over all these 40, 50 years playing D&D with everybody, and just show you a different way to do it, and different style, different style of play. And the more the OSR grows, the better, the happier everybody in the OSR is. So I think we're all on board with that. So again, thank you so much. I appreciate you listening this long, and please share it to anybody you think might like it. Subscribe to the video, definitely. Whenever you're listening to this, I'm trying to beat Eric to 5,000 subs, so that helps me. Subscribe to this video, and let me know what you think. All right, guys. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, and have a great day.